Chapter 1. The inciting incident: a fierce wind howled across the Sussex coastline as the last tendrils of twilight slipped beneath the horizon at Harwood Manor. An opulent country estate perched on white chalk cliffs, the great hall hearth blazed with cheerful warmth, chandeliers glittered overhead, and the guests, lordly and genteel, had gathered for an evening of congenial conversation. Yet beneath polite smiles and measured laughter, tension thrummed like a hidden chord. Inside the marble-lined drawing-room, Hercule Poirot reclined in his high-backed chair. Steepling his immaculate moustache, he surveyed the scene through dark, observant eyes. To his right sat Lady Evelina Harcourt, her pale green silk gown shimmering like water beneath the lamplight. Opposite her, Colonel Frederick Danvers tapped a gold-tipped cane against the rug, impatience writ in every rigid line of his posture. Mrs. Florence Whitaker murmured anxiously to the vicar. Reverend Miles Brackley. Elsewhere, the air was thick, with half-glances and smiles that did not reach certain eyes. All had been well until the dinner bell, rung an hour earlier, had summoned them to the grand oak-panelled dining-room, where after roast venison and fine Bordeaux they returned for coffee and brandy. But now, as lightning forked across the sky, something darker stirred. A muffled clap, half-crack, half-gunshot resounded from the direction of the library. Conversation halted. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Mr. Thomas Rawlings, the steward, leapt to his feet. Before he could speak, a second clear shot rang out, shivering through the tall windows like ice. A collective gasp rose as Lady Evelina slid from her chair. Colonel Danvers lurched forward, and Mrs. Whitaker pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Poirot rose at once, springing over a low ottoman. With surprising agility, "No one moves," he commanded. Voice calm but authoritative, he positioned the nearest guests against the walls, then crossed the hall in 3 measured strides. The corridor beyond was lit only by flickering wall sconces, shadows dancing grotesquely over dark oak panelling. Inside the library lay chaos, overturned furniture, billowing drapes in the storm wind, and on the Persian rug, Sir Reginald Harcourt's body, motionless and pale. Poirot knelt, noting the clean, precise wound beneath the left breast to exact for a panic shot. A leather-bound notebook lay, opened by the hand, its final entry trailing off mid-sentence. "I know what underscore. His gaze lifted to the chimney flue above the logs, where a wisp of soot drifted down. Nestled in the stonework, he spied a small, singed fragment of paper. Retrieving it, he read the minute script. "SRH, trust no one. Damp at the corners." As if someone had tried to destroy it in the fire. It was obviously planted to be found. Rising, Poirot pocketed the scrap like a talisman. Beyond the library archway, the assembled guests pressed forward, faces pale with alarm. "Madam, this is no ordinary crime of passion," Poirot declared. "Someone wished not merely to end a life, but to leave a message in the most uncanny fashion that requires premeditation and the dramatic flair of one who wishes us to see their intention." As thunder rumbled and rain pattered on stained glass panes, he closed the windows and secured the room. Then, addressing the anxious crowd, he said quietly, "Tonight we stand at the threshold of a mystery unlike any you have known. Somewhere in this house hides a villain, both artisan and actor. It is my task to unmask him." Chapter 2. The first close following morning, Harwood Manor awoke under a pall of cloud and rain. Poirot stood in the library once more, the carpet brushed clean of footprints, the furniture hastily restored to its rightful order. Yet the air still trembled with echoes of the previous night's violence. He wore a sober expression, his grey suit crisp, his waxed moustaches impeccably curled. He motioned to Rawlings, who hovered nervously by the door. "Monsieur Poirot, shall I fetch Lady Evelina?" The others, "No." Poirot replied with a gentle but firm insistence. We examine every detail before introducing more disturbance. I must first scrutinize the scene in solitude. He crouched by the body's former position, peering at the faint outline left on the rug, a subtle discoloration where Sir Reginald had lain. Notice, Monomy. The soot is heavier on this side of the hearth. Our culprit may have approached from the chimney end. Rawlings swallowed. But, sir, the flue was secured last night. I locked it myself. Poirot tapped the hearthstone, precisely why the paper fragment was so cunningly hidden. Let us see what else lies beneath the surface. He walked to the fireplace, crouching to examine the logs that still smouldered in the grate. Carefully, he removed a charred fragment of bark from between the embers. Traces of fine fabric clung to it, a dark thread, perhaps from a jacket sleeve. He stowed the piece in a small evidence bag. Note: Rawlings. How the culprit forced the logs aside to plant the scrap. A person in haste, yet thorough enough to hide their tracks. Next, Poirot turned to the open notebook. The page wither and finished note bore a smear of blood at its corner. He slipped on a pair of white gloves and lifted the book to eye level. Observe how the ink line is fainter here, he mused, pointing to the beginning of the sentence. Sir Reginald wrote slowly at first, then accelerated, as though sensing imminent danger. He knew someone would read his words, but the page was torn after his death, suggesting the murderer tried to remove the evidence. Rawlings nodded, eyes wide. Then why leave the initials? Why trust no one? Poirot smiled thinly. Because the murderer wished to mislead. A staged clue is the most dangerous of all, for it diverts attention. He placed the notebook into a leather satchel. Now, I will inspect the rest of the house. He ascended the grand staircase, each step resonating beneath polished mahogany. At the top landing, he paused before a tall portrait of Sir Reginald and Lady Evelina's children. Poirot's gaze flicked between the painted smiles and the real faces below. A family steeped in history and secrets. He murmured, "Let us see where those secrets linger." He entered the drawing-room, where Lady Evelina sat beside a shivering fire, clasping a silver goblet of hot tea. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her gown draped limply. Poirot approached, bowing slightly. "Madam, I require your help. May I see the contents of Sir Reginald's study?" She raised a quivering hand. "Of course, Poirot. Please, do whatever you must in the study." Dark-panelled walls were lined with bookcases. Poirot methodically examined each shelf, drawing volumes about local history and antiquarian artifacts. At the lower right of a slender book on family genealogy, he discovered a faint scarf, evidence the volume had been removed recently. He pulled it out. Behind it lay a small stack of letters tied with crimson ribbon. Unbinding them, Poirot skimmed the neat cursive. Correspondence from an anonymous sender. He announced threats, insinuations of betrayal, mention of a long-overdue reckoning. He tapped the first letter. The handwriting is deliberate, formal. Someone cultivated elegance to hide malice. Lady Evelina peered over his shoulder. But Reginald dismissed them as pranks. He said they lacked conviction. Yet he kept them, Poirot observed. Kept them close, as one preserves a bitter souvenir. Someone wished him to remember someone who shared an intimate knowledge of his routines. He pocketed the letters and moved to the desk's drawers. Inside, he found Sir Reginald's day planner. Flicking through pages, he noted one entry for yesterday afternoon. Meeting with FD2 for a PM. FD were the initials of Colonel Danvers. Underneath, his second entry scratched out hastily. Take to fireplace. Poirot frowned. He called Lady Evelina back to the desk. "Madam, did Sir Reginald and Colonel Danvers meet alone yesterday?" She bit her lip. Yes, they had disagreements about the estate accounts. Reginald accused him of misallocating funds. Poirot nodded, and FD wrote take to fireplace, perhaps instructing Reginald to carry something, maybe documents, to the hearth. He tapped his temple. Something was meant to be burned, but survived. He replaced the planner and returned to the hallway, where Colonel Danvers stood by a window, rain streaking glass behind him. Poirot approached quietly. "Colonel, a word. S'il vous plaît." Danvers turned. Composure regained, though his knuckles gleamed white on the sill. "Yes, monsieur, last evening." "You met with Sir Reginald at 4. May I ask where?" Danvers's jaw tightened. "In his private library." Poirot inclined his head. "And the nature of your disagreement?" The colonel exhaled. "Financial, as she said. But I swear I did not kill him. We parted on civil terms." Poirot studied the man's posture. The slight twitch of his left eyelid. "I have reason to believe documents were moved to the hearth." "Did you see Sir Reginald burning papers?" Danvers hesitated. "He threatened to destroy some contracts that implicated me. I left before he carried them out." Poirot filed this away. "'Tis been. Merci, Colonel." He walked on, mind turning dot in the billiard room. He found Mrs. Whittaker examining cue sticks, though they might spring a secret. He greeted her gently. "Madam, how long were you in the library last night?" She gave a startled gasp. "Long. Only briefly. I fetched Lady Evelina's gloves. Did you notice anything amiss?" She frowned. "Only the storm wind rattling the windows. Then I heard the shots and fled." Poirot nodded. "And the vicar, Reverend Brackley, where was he?" Mrs. Whittaker glanced toward the corridor. "He escorted me to the drawing-room." As the morning light waned under leaden skies, Poirot gathered his impressions: soot-displaced logs, charred fabric, torn notebook, anonymous letters, scratched planner, Colonel's meeting, the staged journey clue. Piecing each fragment in his mind, he walked toward the grand entrance hall, where Reverend Brackley stooped to help a servant hang muddy coats. "Reverend," Poirot said kindly, "you were last at the hearth before the shots. Did Sir Reginald manipulate the logs himself?" The vicar glanced up, brow furrowed. "He stoked the fire earlier. I went to pray in the chapel, then returned to find this." He gestured helplessly. Poirot nodded gravely. "Your prayers did not disturb the culprit. Our murderer knew the schedule well. They waited until Sir Reginald was isolated." He paused in the center of the hall and turned to Rawlings, who had followed silently. "Monsieur, see that no one enters or leaves the library until further notice. I will require a complete list of everyone's whereabouts from midday onward yesterday, including servants." Rawlings bowed. "Yes, sir." As Poirot ascended to his room for reflection, thunder rumbled in the distance. He closed the door and perched on the edge of his bed, notebook and evidence bag in hand. The little grey cells ticked steadily. The first clues had been laid bare, yet each seemed to point in conflicting directions, and Poirot, ever the maestro of deduction, felt the symphony of mystery deepen. Outside, the storm intensified. Within Harwood Manor, secrets brewed stronger than any tempest. Poirot, poised between revelation and confusion, prepared to delve ever deeper into the hearts of his suspects and to unravel the deception hiding behind every courtesy smile. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. Midday sun broke through ragged clouds as Lady Evelina Harcourt summoned the household to the drawing-room. Word had spread of Poirot's intention to assemble everyone under one roof, and an uneasy hush accompanied each rival. Rawlings stationed servants near the doors to enforce Poirot's strict instruction: no one leave until questioned. Poirot stood by the fireplace, its hearth now cold, observing as one by one the key figures entered. First came Colonel Frederick Danvers, his military bearing unchanged but his face drawn. He bowed stiffly to Poirot. Next, Mrs. Florence Whitaker glided in, her feathered hat removed to reveal trembling curls. Reverend Miles Brackley followed, clutching a small leather prayer book. Lady Evelina herself entered last, her pallor heightened by the afternoon light. Poirot inclined his head in greeting. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for your prompt cooperation. We shall now clarify each person's whereabouts and actions leading up to the tragedy." His tone was gentle but commanding. "Please state, in turn, what you were doing at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon." Colonel Danvers stepped forward. "At precisely 4, I was in the library with my sister-in-law, Lady Evelina," he stated. "Sir Reginald and I disputed the estate accounts afterward. I left to take the carriage horses for exercise. I did not return until 6. He folded his arms. "I can provide the groom's testimony." Poirot's eyes flicked to Lady Evelina. "Madam, I was with Colonel Danvers," she confirmed softly. "Then I retired to the drawing-room to compose myself. I spoke with Mrs. Whitaker about lunch arrangements and later drank tea here until the bell summoned us." Her voice wavered, but she held Poirot's gaze firmly. Mrs. Whitaker smoothed her dress. "I joined Lady Evelina around 4:30. I then fetched her gloves from the library just before the dinner bell. I did not linger. The storm wind frightened me." Reverend Brackley cleared his throat. "I met with Sir Reginald in the chapel at 4 to discuss charitable bequests. He seemed troubled but refused to elaborate. I left when Lady Evelina's maid summoned me to the drawing-room." Rawlings produced his notes. "The groom confirms Colonel Danvers departed at 4:30 and returned at 6. The chapel door logs show Reverend Brackley entered at 3:50 and left at 4:20. He looked apprehensive. All servants corroborate these times, except that no one saw Mrs. Whitaker in the library after the dinner bell. Only the shots." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "'Twas been. Now, I wish to understand each relationship to our victim. What might you gain, if anything, from Sir Reginald's death?" Lady Evelina paled and looked away. "My brother was my only family. I cannot imagine benefit from his loss." Danvers's jaw tightened. "Reginald intended to alter his will. He threatened to remove my annuity, should his new testament eliminate me. I would suffer significantly, but I would never harm him." Mrs. Whitaker's lips trembled. "Sir, Reginald was my oldest friend, yet he refused my loan application years ago, when I needed funds for my husband's medical care. I harbor resentment, but not murderous intent." Reverend Brackley clasped his prayer book. "Our friendship was bound by faith. Reginald contemplated diverting church donations toward his personal endeavors. I fear for my congregation, but again I would not kill." Poirot watched each speaker, noting voice pitch, eye movement, and posture. Then he held up his hand. "You all speak truthfully, in words. But what of hidden debts? Ambitions, grudges? We shall soon discover what lies beneath courtesy." He produced the stack of anonymous letters. "Sir Reginald preserved these heartfelt threats. Who among you recognizes the handwriting?" The letters passed from hand to hand. None paused. Lady Evelina shook her head. Colonel Danvers frowned, but did not speak. Mrs. Whitaker's fingers brushed the ribbon anxiously. The vicar closed his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Poirot replaced the letters. "These notes refer to a reckoning, financial, emotional, or otherwise. Someone sought vengeance or justice. This is not mere coincidence." He moved to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Harwood Manor seems peaceful, yet within its walls seethe motives from murder. He turned and surveyed the room. "Until I learn more, I must request 2 things. First, That each of you produce any correspondence you have received in the past month. Second, that no one communicate with the outside world until I permit it. His gaze fell on Colonel Danvers. Colonel, I trust you to oversee the records. Danvers inclined his head. Of course, monsieur. Poirot stepped back. You are dismissed for now. Prepare yourselves. I shall question you all again individually. In the meantime, reflect on what you have said. He glanced at Rawlings. Show these gentlemen and ladies to their rooms, and ensure no papers. Vanish as the group dispersed. Lady Evelina lingered. Hercule, do you believe one of us is the murderer? Her voice was a whisper only he could hear. Poirot smiled kindly. Madam, I know one of you is. My task now is to search for contradictions between words and truth, and when I find them, the murderer will be revealed. Alone once more, he gathered his notes and letters. His storm of secrets rolled in his mind, secrets he intended to unravel, one by one. The quiet gathering had exposed little, yet hinted at much as thunder rumbled overhead. Poirot's resolve sharpened. The closed circle would not remain closed for long. Chapter 4. Poirot's first impression sleep that afternoon. Dusk settled over Harwood Manor like a grey shawl. Poirot stood alone in the grand entrance hall, the portraits of Harcourt and sisters watching him with painted fascination. He laid the evidence scrap of paper, charred bark, fabric thread, anonymous letters, and the day planner on a polished mahogany console. By the light of a single lamp, he studied each item in turn, mentally arranging the threads of this tangled web. He murmured to himself, "The murderer is bold yet cautious, concealing clues in plain sight, crafting letters to provoke fear, staging a homicide like a grim performance." His mustaches quivered with satisfaction. He fingered the torn paper. Trust no one. But in fact, it was a taunt for Poirot, a challenge he gladly accepted. A soft knock sounded. Rawlings entered, carrying a silver tray with coffee and biscuits. "Monsieur Poirot, the Colonel is awaiting you in the library, Mrs. Whitaker in the billiard room, Reverend Brackley in the chapel." He hesitated. "Madame Harcourt is reluctant to eat, 'tis been," said Poirot. "Let us begin with Colonel Danvers." He rose, donning his gloves, and followed Rawlings down the corridor to the library. Colonel Danvers sat stiffly in a leather armchair, eyes cast downward. Poirot closed the door behind him and seated himself in the opposite chair. "Colonel, I thank you for joining me again." His tone was courteous but incisive. "I wish to understand more about your relationship with Sir Reginald." Danvers inhaled. "He was my brother-in-law and business partner. Our disagreements were only over finances, nothing personal." He straightened his tunic. "I assure you, Poirot, I bore him no ill will." Poirot tapped the armrest. "Yet your meeting at Fro was followed by an entry in his planner. Take to fireplace." What did he mean? He leaned forward. "Colonel, did you witness him burning something?" Danvers hesitated. "He told me he intended to destroy some bank statements. He worried they implicated me. I advised against it, but he insisted." "And did you leave before he carried out the deed?" Danvers's eyes flickered. "Yes, I left to exercise the horses. I heard nothing until the shots." Poirot nodded slowly. "You instructed him on the contents to burn, then departed. The logs were disturbed intentionally to insert the paper. Perhaps the murderer needed to hide something, a vestige of evidence." He studied Danvers's hands, no telltale tremor. "Merci. Colonel, you may go." Danvers bowed and left. Poirot tidied the papers on the console, then strode to the billiard room. Mrs. Whitaker stood by the green-topped table, absently tracing the ivory balls with her fingertips. She looked up as Poirot approached. "Monsieur, forgive my nose. No need." said Porret, offering a gentle smile. "Tell me precisely what you saw in the library last evening." She drew in a quivering breath. "I fetched Lady Evelina's gloves. The door was ajar. I heard the storm. Saw Sir Reginald examining his notebook. Then a crash, I think a log fell, and moments later." "The shots, a log fell," Porret repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Or was it placed to fall?" She faltered. I only heard. I was frightened and left." Porret stepped closer. "You handle billiard cues and paper daily. Did you notice any dust displaced on the library mantel? Smudge marks?" She shook her head. "No." "Monsieur," Porret tapped a cue stick. "Thank you. Madame, your testimony is helpful." He left her with a curt nod and paced toward the chapel. Reverend Brackley stood by the stained glass window, shadowed figures of saints behind him. He closed his prayer book as Porret approached. "Monsieur, Reverend, you met Sir Reginald at 3:50, then left at 4:20. What pressed you to return so quickly?" The vicar clasped his book. "I prayed for guidance. Reginald confided in me. He was deeply distressed. When I heard voices and feared something was wrong, I hurried back." Porret studied his face. "You speak of voices whose, the wind, the logs in the hearth, they crackled violently. Yet only one voice matters, the murderer's." Porret paused. "Do you possess any correspondence similar to these letters?" He laid the stack before the priest. Brackley's brow clouded. He shook his head. "Nothing of that nature. I counseled Sir Reginald on church donations, but he kept those matters strictly private." Porret inclined his head. "Very well. Thank you." He left the chapel. The priest's silent resignation lingering thought back in the entrance hall. Porret assembled his thoughts. Each suspect had plausible opportunity and motive. Danvers threatened financially. Whitaker spurned in friendship. Brackley concerned over church interests. Evelina bereft sister. Yet none had confessed ignorance of the staged chimney clue. Their memory gaps were telling. Porret touched his forehead. "My little grey cells must search beyond spoken words." He took up the day planner again. The torn-out entry lay between pages, its absence conspicuous. He pondered whether Sir Reginald had himself removed evidence from that page before his death. He replaced the planner and strolled toward the grand staircase. Feeling its polished banister under his fingertips, at the foot of the stairs, the butler, Mr. Hanson, awaited. Porret nodded. "Hanson, have you noticed any unusual comings or goings among the staff in recent days?" Hanson hesitated. "Well, monsieur, the housemaid Mary found footprints near the library chimney early this morning, small boot prints. Not from our regular staff. She thought them the cleaners, but he wears brogues." "Not boots?" Porret's eyes brightened. "Boot prints in the hearth dust." "Excellent. Hanson, preserve that area undisturbed." "Yes, monsieur." Porret ascended to the drawing-room, where Lady Evelina sat gazing at the rain. He took the seat beside her. "Madam, how do you feel?" She sighed. "Lost, monsieur." Reginald guarded his papers fiercely. "I thought our family open and honest. Yet I seen our secrets lurked everywhere." He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Madam, you speak truth, but truth is veiled in half-truths and omissions. That is where I search." He observed her pale hands. "Have you ever received letters in unusual handwriting, anonymous?" She shook her head. "Only once, an invitation to a distant cousin's wedding." "Nothing menacing?" Porret nodded. "Merci." "Madam." He rose. "I believe I have sufficient material to consolidate my theory. I shall retire and reflect before the next questioning." As he walked away, Lady Evelina whispered, "Hercule, do you think I am safe?" He paused and turned, offering a gentle smile. "Madam, in a house of secrets, None are truly safe until the truth emerges, but rest assured, I shall not rest until I expose our culprit. That night, in his chamber, Poirot spread the materials once more. The scrap of paper marked "Trust no one," the charred bark with fabric thread, the anonymous letters, the scratched planner entry, the boot prints, report. He lit a lamp, the flame flickering like a watchful eye dot combining each fragment. He traced a map of deceit, the killer's careful concealment in the chimney, the deliberate preservation of threatening letters, the removal of plan details from Sir Reginald's own hand, the fabric thread from a tailor-made coat, the mysterious boot prints dot as the storm beat against the windows. Poirot's mind raced. He saw the outline of the villain's profile, someone cunning enough to manipulate both evidence and emotions, close enough to understand Sir Reginald's routines, bold enough to leave a theatrical clue dot in the hush of midnight. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would set the next phase in motion, the first false lead. And in that play of shadows and red herrings, the murderer's mask would slip. Chapter 5. Initial interviews began next morning. Rain had given way to a crisp, sunlit sky. But Harwood Manor still felt wrapped in a heavy hush. Poirot descended the grand staircase, carrying his notebook and evidence satchel, and proceeded to the library, where the first of his formal interviews would take place. Rawlings stood by the door, bowing respectfully, guided by Poirot's calm demeanor. Colonel Danvers entered, his uniform neat, his expression guarded. Poirot offered a chair. "Colonel, thank you for meeting me once more. Today, I wish to explore in detail your conversation with Sir Reginald on the afternoon of his demise." He tapped his notebook. "You informed me that you discussed financial documents which he intended to destroy. Tell me, when you left him, did he appear distressed or angry?" Danvers leaned forward, elbows on knees. He was frustrated, yes, but not enraged. He spoke of deceit in the estate's management. He placed the papers on the desk, gestured toward the hearth, and said he would burn them. I told him it was a mistake, then departed. "Very precise," Poirot said, nodding. "And after your departure, did you notice any sound approaching the library? Any sound of footsteps or voices?" The detective's gaze was intent. Catching the flicker behind Danvers's eyes, the colonel's jaw tightened. "No, the storm drowned most sounds. I recall only the crackle of logs, then silence, then the shots." He paused. "One question, monsieur. Why does the direction of the logs' disturbance matter?" Poirot smiled thinly. "Because the logs were shifted deliberately, suggesting the murder returned after Sir Reginald's death to plant the scrap. That implies opportunity and planning beyond a momentary crime of passion." He closed his notebook. "Merci, Colonel. That is all. For now." Danvers stood, inclining his head, and left the library. Next, Poirot made his way to the billiard room, where Mrs. Whittaker waited, her posture tense as she held her gloves in both hands. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the green baize. "Madam," Poirot began, folding his hands, "yesterday you retrieved Lady Evelina's gloves from Sir Reginald's library. I wish to understand why gloves required fetching at that hour." She swallowed, eyes darting. "It was chilly. Lady Evelina complained her hands were cold. So I thought to bring her gloves." It was nothing more. Her voice quavered. Poirot arched an eyebrow. "Indeed. Yet gloves also conceal fingerprints. Could you see the gloves she wore earlier in the day?" He watched her carefully. Mrs. Whittaker hesitated. "She wore a pair of pale leather gloves, but I do not recall their condition. She cradled the gloves as though they were evidence. I did not think of fingerprints." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "You did not look closely, yet you handled them here in the billiard room." He leaned back. "Were there any papers or objects you noticed in the library besides the notebook?" She pressed her lips. "Only teacups, the fireplace, and Sir Reginald's notebook." I was flustered by the storm and by the gunshots. I did not examine further. Her gaze dropped. Poirot closed his notebook. "Very well. Madam, thank you for your candor." He rose and left. Noting how her fingers trembled even after leaving the library's chill dot in the chapel, Poirot found Reverend Brackley lighting a candle. The holy air of incense lingered round him. The vicar greeted Poirot with a small nod. "Reverend." "Our conversation continues," Poirot said softly. "You mentioned you heard voices and logs crackling. Did you hear any words spoken by Sir Reginald after you left him?" Reverend Brackley hesitated, setting a match aside. "I heard no distinct words. Only the wind and the logs. I prayed for him, then returned to the drawing-room when I feared something amiss. I did not enter the library again until summoned." "Yet you wrote in your journal that you heard a faint muttering words of apology. Perhaps," Poirot asked, tapping the evidence notebook. The vicar's cheeks coloured. "That was after the shots. When I knelt by his body, I thought I heard him murmur 'forgive,' but it may have been my own imagination." His thumb brushed the spine of his prayer book. Poirot studied him. Imagination can mislead as much as truth. "Nevertheless, I thank you, Reverend." He closed his notebook and left the chapel. Noting the vicar's prayer book resting open on the altar, finally, Poirot sought Lady Evelina in her suite, where afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains. She sat at a writing desk, stirring tea absent-mindedly. "Madam, I return to you with specific questions," Poirot said gently. "Your brother kept these anonymous letters. Did you ever see him read them, or did he share their contents with you?" Lady Evelina's shoulders trembled. "He showed them to me once, years ago, when he first received the threats. He laughed them off then, but I saw the furrow in his brow. He kept them locked away." Poirot nodded. "And on the night of his death, did he mention any new threats, any fresh letters?" She shook her head. "No. He seemed preoccupied, but spoke only of a state business." Her eyes welled. "He assured me all was in hand." Poirot paused. "Madam, you are the heart of this family. Did you observe any tension between Sir Reginald and our other suspects?" She closed her eyes. "Only between him and Colonel Danvers. They argued openly before dinner, though they reconciled. Mrs. Whittaker and he were cordial but distant, and I found Reverend Brackley in earnest discussion with him about parish funds." Poirot rose, tucking his notebook away. "Thank you, madam. Your cooperation is invaluable." He offered a comforting bow. Alone again, Poirot retreated to his chamber, where he reviewed his notes, precise times, heated words, trembling hands, possible cover for fingerprints, ambiguous muttering, hidden letters, and the disturbed logs. He noted each contradiction. Danvers's con despite financial threat, Whittaker's handling of gloves without noticing prints, Brackley's uncertain memory, Evelina's partial knowledge. He lit a lamp and placed the small fragment of chart bark beside the torn notebook page. "The stage is set for a false lead," he whispered. "They have each thrown shadows upon the truth." His little grey cells flickered to life, weaving the testimonies into patterns of deception. The initial interviews had begun. Seeds of doubt were planted, and Poirot, ever the master conductor, poised himself to orchestrate the next movement in this dark symphony of mystery. Chapter 6. The first false lead late that afternoon. A crisp breeze swept through Harwood Manor's corridors, carrying the distant clip-clop of mounted police. Poirot, having completed his interviews, stood beneath the grand chandelier in the entrance hall, observing the arrival of Inspector Talbot and to Constables Talbot A stout man with a bristling moustache bowed to Poirot. "Monsieur," he said, "we've discovered new evidence that points decisively at Colonel Danvers. I trust you have no objection to a formal rest." Poirot, inclining his head, replied in measured tones, "Inspector, the evidence is compelling, but perhaps we should review it together to ensure no detail is overlooked." Talbot's eyes gleamed. "Certainly." In the library's half-dust, Constable Reeves found a silver cufflink bearing the Colonel's family crest, an intertwined D and H jammed between the logs this morning. The Greek silver flintlock pistol was traced to your suspect. It was seen in Colonel Danvers's possession during the family's shooting party last autumn. We have motive, opportunity, and now physical proof. Poirot examined the cufflink through his pince-nez. Its surface was smudged with ash. He turned it over in his gloved hand, noting a tiny nick on its edge. "Indeed, it matches Colonel Danvers's cufflinks." He laid it gently on a velvet tray. "Yet the nick is deeper here than on his pair." He lifted his gaze. "Might there be another set, an identical heirloom? Or perhaps a plant?" Talbot frowned. "Monsieur, I must say you hesitate at the convenience of justice. The cufflink was found directly at the crime scene. The Colonel's alibi is already shaky." At that, Colonel Danvers, handcuffed and escorted by a constable, was brought before them. His uniform coat remained crisp, but eyes had darkened. He approached Poirot. "Monsieur, this is preposterous. I returned at 6, with witnesses. How did my cufflink end up in the hearth?" Poirot observed Danvers's restraint. "An excellent question. I shall explore it further. But, Inspector, I understand you also have testimony concerning the pistol." Talbot produced a small card. "Constable Harris recognized this exact model from your shooting party. The Colonel borrowed it for target practice the night of the murder. He could easily have disposed of it in the dark." The constable displayed a black powder residue on the pistol's mechanism, freshly fired. He declared. Danvers's lip quivered. "I returned the pistol immediately after practice. I had no need to fire it again." Poirot placed a hand on Danvers's shoulder. "Remain calm. Colonel, we shall review your movements. Inspector, might I see the hearth's dust sample?" Talbot handed Poirot a small vial. Inside lay grey ash mixed with flecks of wool and soot. Poirot sniffed delicately. "I detect no coronet motif fibers, only coarse wool. The cufflink rests upon ash, not interwoven with other debris. It could have been placed there deliberately, after the fact." Talbot bristled. "You suggest someone framed the Colonel?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I merely propose alternative possibilities. It is not beyond human cunning to divert suspicion from oneself onto another, especially one under financial strain." Talbot paced. "Monsieur, the law requires action. I must place Colonel Danvers under formal arrest." Poirot bowed. "Of course, Inspector." He turned to Danvers. "Colonel, I regret this turn, but I have every confidence in your eventual exoneration." As the constables led the Colonel away, Lady Evelina rushed downstairs, her face pale. "Hercule, they're taking Frederick. You must stop this." Poirot placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Madam, trust me, there is more to learn." He closed his eyes momentarily, as if listening to thoughts whispered by the manor's very walls. Once the hall was cleared, Poirot sent Rawlings to fetch the fireplace screen and a fresh hearthrake. He knelt before the logs, gently brushing away loose ash underneath. He found no cufflink or metal glint, only the imprint of a boot heel pressed into soft hearthstone. He traced the outline with his finger. An odd boot, shallow tread, likely belonging to a local visitor or a staff uniform. Rising, he examined the hearth's back interior. Touching soot-blackened bricks, he retrieved a small fragment of cloth, snagged on a protruding nail, coarse brown fabric. Unlike the Colonel's tailored wool, he bagged it carefully. Rawlings entered bearing a handful of soot, Monsieur Porret. I collected these ash dust samples from the hearth and floor. Should I send them to London for analysis? Porret shook his head. Not yet. Rawlings, keep them with care. We may compare them with the fabric fragment. He studied the fireplace as if interrogating it. Our culprit staged this scene to point at the colonel. A planted cufflink, a burrowed pistolet. Is too neat. Outside. Thunder rumbled, as though echoing Porret's doubt. He closed the hearth and stood, smoothing his suit. Rawlings, some and Mrs. Whitaker and Reverend Brackley. I wish to review their testimonies in light of this development. Rawlings bowed and hurried off. Porret remained alone, gazing at the mantel clock, whose glass face reflected his sombre image. He touched the scrap of paper pinned beneath its hands. Trust no one. His little grey cells churned. The murder had been solved, at least on the surface, but Porret sensed the music was far from its final chord. Someone had orchestrated this false movement to distract and mislead. Moments later, the billiard room door opened, admitting Mrs. Whitaker and Reverend Brackley. They paused, startled to see the freshly swept hearth. Porret greeted them softly. Madam, Reverend, thank you for coming. Tell me, did either of you handle Colonel Danvers's cufflinks? In recent days, Mrs. Whitaker's face paled. No. Monsieur, Reverend Brackley shook his head. I have never seen them. Porret placed the cufflink on a table. Then how might it have reached the hearth? Consider that it was pressed to top ashes after the murder. He pointed to the clean imprint of the boot heel on the stone, and this fragment of cloth was caught inside. Neither matches the colonel's attire. He tapped the glove, yet the authorities found this and drew their conclusion. Mrs. Whitaker whispered, who would frame him? Porret looked at each in turn. That is the question. For now, the charge stands, but I believe it will be overturned once the truth emerges. He allowed a brief, encouraging smile. Let us continue. As the inspector's men escorted Colonel Danvers to a cell in the coach house, Porret watched. From a window, shoulders squared against the gathering dusk, the first false lead had drawn blood and promised to ensnare an innocent man. But in the theatre of crime, Porret knew, the most convincing lies were those built upon stage truths, and he, the ultimate director, would undo the deception one hidden thread at a time. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut that evening. Harwood Manor's drawing room was ranged for a modest gathering. Lady Evelina, Mrs. Whitaker, and Reverend Brackley took seats round the low marble table, candles flickering between them. Porret entered, hands clasped behind his back, the afternoon's revelations dancing behind his calm eyes. Msemus. He began. We have witnessed how physical evidence can mislead. Yet the heart of this matter lies not in objects, but in the human soul. He poured 3 glasses of claret and placed one before each guest. Tonight, I invite you to a different kind of examination and exercise in truth, aided by conversation. Lady Evelina drew a shuddering breath. Is this necessary? Monsieur, essential. Porret replied. A murderer's most telling weakness is psychological. Guilt, fear, the desire to unburden oneself, even to a sympathetic ear. He settled into an armchair opposite them. We shall speak freely. I will present hypothetical scenarios, and you will respond as honestly as you may. Watch one another, observe reactions. He lifted his glass. First, suppose you believed an innocent friend had been arrested for a crime you yourself committed. How would you feel? He sipped slowly as he watched their faces. Lady Evelina's lips pressed together. She set down her glass with a trembling hand. Horrible. I would feel responsible. Furious, and I would confess to save the innocent. Mrs. Whitaker's eyes flickered. She reached out. patting her glass as though for courage. I would be racked by guilt and dread. The Reverend cleared his throat. I would pray fervently for justice and hope the truth came to light. Poirot nodded. Excellent. Now imagine you had planted a piece of evidence to frame someone else. Would you feel remorse or relief? His gaze lingered on Mrs. Whittaker, whose knuckles turned white round the stem of her glass. I would never frame another, Lady Evelina said quietly. Mrs. Whittaker swallowed. Her voice wavered. Relief would be mixed with shame. But I would tell no one. Reverend Brackley closed his eyes. I could not. To deceive Justice No, I would be undone by conscience. Poirot allowed a moment's pause, then spoke softly. Interesting. Guilt is a powerful force, you see. I recently discovered a cufflink planted in the hearth to implicate Colonel Danvers, an innocent man. He watched their expressions. Mrs. Whittaker's lips parted, as if to speak, then closed. Lady Evelina bent her head, concealing her face. The Reverend's forehead creased in concern. Yet Poirot continued. The murderer did not plant only the cufflink. A scrap of paper was lodged in the chimney. Trust no one. He tapped the table. A message, perhaps to me or to someone who reads these lines. He placed the scrap before them. Reverend Brackley leaned forward. Did you read more? Then the initials. Poirot nodded, only that it was charred at the edges, as though someone attempted to destroy it, then wished it to be found. He fixed Mrs. Whittaker with direct gaze. One might destroy evidence, but ensure its survival elsewhere. Whittaker's breath hitched. She looked at Lady Evelina, then away. Now, Poirot said, rising, I shall propose an experiment. He crossed to the mantel and retrieved a folded sheet of paper, unfolding it. He read aloud in measured tones. I did not intend the cufflink to be lost. I wished to implicate another. He paused, glancing at the group. Suppose this note were genuine, written by the murderer, what emotion might it convey? Lady Evelina shuddered. Cunning and cruelty. The Reverend swallowed. Desperation or arrogance. Mrs. Whittaker's fingers trembled so violently the paper rustled. Her cheeks flushed. It reveals wanting to shift blame. Poirot smiled slightly. Indeed. Now, madam, when last did you handle Colonel Danvers's cufflinks? He asked kindly, though his eyes bore into her. Whittaker's hand darted toward her throat. I never. Yet the cufflink had a nick. Poirot pressed, deeper than on his pair. Someone else's cufflink would bear a different mark. Do you wear such jewelry? She shook her head. Only these, and she touched a simple brooch pin to her lapel. Poirot nodded and turned to the Reverend. And you, Reverend, you handle church vestments. But have you ever worn cufflinks? The vicar looked startled. Never. Monsieur, Lady Evelina finally interjected, voice low. Hercule, this exercise, what do you intend? Poirot returned to his chair, to observe reactions, to notice the slightest tremor, the micro-expression of a guilty conscience. You see, Msamus, the murderer has orchestrated both physical evidence and emotional falsehoods. We must unravel both. He sipped his claret. One final scenario. If you believed someone was watching you, even in solitude, planting clues where you least expect, how would you respond? Silence fell. Outside, a distant owl called. As though echoing the question, Lady Evelina set her glass down firmly. I would become paranoid, mistrust everyone. Reverend Brackley looked unsettled. I would seek counsel, confession, to clear my mind. Mrs. Whittaker swallowed audibly. I would feel hunted. Poirot laid down his glass. Precisely. The murder remains among us. Hidden behind civility, as long as they believe. They are unobserved. They act freely. But now, Msamus, they know my interest is focused. They will betray themselves in their next move. He stood, inclining his head. I thank you for your honesty. You may retire, but I will call you again soon. In the meantime, consider these scenarios, observe your companion's reactions, and remember, even the most polished mask slips under pressure. They rose, exchanging uncertain glances. As the door closed behind them, Porritt murmured to himself, "The game is afoot. The mind must be tested before the body can be properly examined." He retrieved his notebook and sat by the hearth, pen poised over paper, ready to record every nuance, every flicker of doubt. Outside, night settled over Harwood Manor, within its walls. The true performance had begun, one of psychology, misdirection, and the relentless unmasking of the guilty soul. And Porritt, conductor of this subtle theatre, prepared to watch each player stumble upon the stage of their own conscience. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. Following day dawned clear and bright, as if nature sought to contrast the darkness that still lay heavy at Harwood Manor, yet within its venerable walls tensions ripened further. As Porritt inspected his notes in the library, Rawlings entered with a troubled expression. "Monsieur Porritt," he announced, "there has been an incident in Lady Evelina's private sitting room. Mrs. Montague, her lady's maid, discovered." Madame slumped by her writing desk, clutching a teacup. Porritt set aside his pen and rose. "Lead the way, Rawlings." They hurried along a narrow corridor, passing closed doors and framed landscapes, until they reached Lady Evelina's suite. There, on an ornate Persian rug, Princess Maud's portrait looked down with serene indifference, while Madame herself lay on a chaise longue, pale and trembling. A half-finished cup of tea stood on a side table, its surface stained with a fleck of dark residue. Beside it, Evelina's silver teaspoon bore fine granules of powder-speckled residue. Mrs. Montague hovered at the threshold, wringing her hands. "Forgive me, Monsieur Porritt. I found her like this, trembling and unconscious. I brought help at once." Porritt approached Lady Evelina, kneeling beside her with professional care. Her eyelids fluttered open, eyes glassy. "Mademoiselle, I feel so weak." He offered her a steadying hand. "You have ingested something, not tea, but perhaps a poison. Did you notice anything amiss in your teapot or cup?" Lady Evelina shook her head, voice faint. "I took tea as usual. Mrs. Whittaker brought it in with sugar and lemon. I felt burning on my tongue." Then darkness. Porritt rose, scanning the tray. He donned gloves and dipped a fingertip into the tea, drawing out a few grains of the powder. He smelled them thoughtfully. Bitter almonds. He held the granules to his eye under the light. Cyanide in minute. Nearly undetectable doses. Mrs. Montague gasped, "Poison. But two. Harm Lady Evelina, who would dare?" Porritt's expression remained calm. An attempt, not a certainty. The dosage was insufficient to kill, but enough to incapacitate. He pocketed a fragment in an evidence pouch. "Who prepared this tea?" Mrs. Montague glanced toward the door. Mrs. Whittaker, Madame's friend, brought it herself. She offered to fetch something to steady Madame's nerves after last night's events. At that, Porritt's gaze sharpened. "Fetch her." Moments later, Mrs. Whittaker entered, composed yet pale. She curtsied. "Monsieur Porritt." I heard Porritt held up a hand. "Tell me, Madam, did you prepare Lady Evelina's tea yourself?" Whittaker swallowed. "Yes, I placed tea leaves in the pot, added water, sugar, and lemon. I stirred with the spoon." She indicated the silver teaspoon. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. "Did you handle the sugar bowl or lemon?" She nodded. "I sliced the lemon, then returned to pour. I did not notice anything unusual." Porritt studied her. Yet this cup contained a substance lethal to the touch. He held up the teaspoon. "Why use this spoon rather than another? Why volunteer to serve tea?" Whitaker's lips quivered. "I thought to comfort Lady Evelina. She seemed distressed. She glanced at the teacup. I would never harm her." Porritt inclined his head. "Nevertheless, someone placed poison here. And someone knew that Lady Evelina would find solace in tea." He looked from Mrs. Whitaker to Rawlings. "Were any other beverages consumed here earlier?" Rawlings shook his head. "Only water and herbal infusion." Porritt turned to Lady Evelina, who lay back on the chaise. "Madam, you and Mrs. Whitaker have dined in this room several times. Did you ever notice the sugar bowl tarnished inside, or a scratch on its rim?" Evelina frowned. "No, but I did think the sugar tasted more bitter than usual once." She closed her eyes. "I dismissed it. That bitterness was cyanide's signature." Porritt tapped his chin. "The secondary mystery is no accident. It is a deliberate diversion, adding fresh panic to our investigation." He paced between the window and the door. "Our murderer has moved from staging a murder to staging a poisoning. They wish to draw our focus away from the first crime to sow confusion." Whitaker's breath hitched. "But why target Lady Evelina? To frighten her, to remove a witness." Porritt regarded her closely. "Perhaps to provoke a confession from Colonel Danvers, or to implicate their reverend who might be thought to use scripture and poison metaphors, or to cast suspicion upon me for failing to prevent further harm." He turned to Rawlings. "Send for Inspector Talbot at once. He must be informed of attempted poisoning. Immediately, monsieur." As Rawlings left, Porritt leaned toward Lady Evelina. "Madam, you must rest. Do not speak of this incident to anyone except myself." He offered a reassuring smile. "Drink only what I provide." She nodded wanly. Porritt then stood before Mrs. Whitaker. "Madam, I shall test this teaspoon and the remaining tea, meanwhile. Remain here until I return." Whitaker complied, though her posture suggested relief at being under surveillance. Porritt swept past them and exited the suite. Closing the door softly in the corridor, he encountered Reverend Brackley. The vicar started, then bowed. "Monsieur Porritt." "I heard an incident of grave concern." Porritt said quietly, "I shall require your whereabouts at the time Lady Evelina drank the tea." Brackley inclined his head. "I was in the chapel at prayer until shortly before supper. I then joined Mrs. Whitaker in the drawing-room." "Thank you." Porritt continued on, mind racing. The attempted poisoning suggested not only malice, but a deeper strategy to frighten, to isolate suspects, and to test Porritt's vigilance. Whoever stood behind it was bold indeed. He reached the library and set the kettle on to boil, taking a fresh teapot from a locked cabinet. He measured leaves with clinical precision. He added water, sugar, and lemon, stirring with a second silver spoon, one he had marked with a discreet punch. He examined the teaspoon, noting its identical design to the one used by Mrs. Whitaker, yet untainted. The kettle whistled. Porritt poured himself a small cup and inhaled deeply. He winced at the familiar bitterness of the cyanide under his tongue, just enough to confirm the poison's identity, but harmless in this trace amount thanks to his practiced caution. He rinsed the mouth with water, then placed the cup aside. At that moment, Inspector Talbot arrived, accompanied by a laboratory aide. Porritt greeted them. "Inspector, a secondary crime. Attempted poisoning of Lady Evelina. I believe it is connected to our primary mystery. Not a random act." Talbot frowned. "Monsieur, this case grows darker by the hour." Porritt gestured to the teapot and teaspoon. "These have been secured. I ask the laboratory to test both, and the residue." He paused. "Meanwhile, secure Lady Evelina's suite. No one enters or leaves. and keep Mrs. Whitaker under observation. Talbot nodded. Right away. As the inspector and aide departed with the evidence, Porritt reclined in his chair. Gazing into the fireplace, the dual crimes are murder staged, with a planted cufflink. Now an attempted poisoning told a story of escalating desperation. The murderer sought to distract, to frighten, and perhaps to force a mistake. Within the hush of the library, Porritt's mustaches quivered with anticipation. The investigation had deepened into a labyrinth of misdirection, and Porritt, undaunted, resolved to track each path through the darkness until the final revelation shone clear. Chapter 9. Hidden connections. Late morning sunlight filtered through the high mullioned windows of the library, illuminating motes of dust that danced like restless spirits. Porritt sat at his desk, reviewing evidence laid out before him: the charred paper, cufflink sample, fabric fragment, cyanide residue, and the day planner's torn page. Yet these physical elements, while crucial, formed only half the tapestry. The other half lay in the concealed bonds among the inhabitants of Harwood Manor. Rawlings entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Monsieur," he said softly, setting one before Porritt, "Inspector Talbot has agreed to delay the colonel's remand if you believe further inquiry will exonerate him." Porritt nodded in gratitude. "Mercy, Rawlings. Now, I must explore the ties that bind my suspects. Tell me, has anyone discovered letters or documents indicating secret alliances or shared endeavors?" Rawlings hesitated. "Only the anonymous threats to Sir Reginald, monsieur, but I have compiled a list of financial ledgers from the estate office. Perhaps these could reveal hidden transactions." "Excellent," said Porritt. He took his coffee and rose, offering the other to Rawlings. "Bring the ledgers. I shall review them at once." Moments later, Rawlings returned with a leather-bound volume and a sheaf of brittle account sheets. Porritt spread them upon the table and examined line after line of expenditures, investments, and charitable contributions. At first glance, the figures seemed routine: repairs, wages, local tithes. Yet his keen eye detected anomalies: large disbursements to an unmarked CL account, sizable donations to the local parish for above customary amounts, and a sudden cessation of payments to the carriage stable. He tapped a ledger entry dated 2 weeks prior: £500 to CL, private retainer. Porritt murmured, "Who could CL be? Not Sir Reginald's initials, surely." He scanned the list of household staff and guests. No one's name matched. Then his eyes flicked to the family tree portrait in the corner. Charles Langford, lady, Evelina's estranged cousin, exiled after a scandal 10 years ago. Could he have returned in secret? Rawlings watched Porritt's concentration. "Monsieur, Lady Evelina did mention distant relatives in her youth, but she said they lost contact." Porritt closed his eyes. "Precisely. A hidden connection. Sir Reginald maintained ties with an unknown beneficiary. Perhaps CL returned under cover to claim funds and to threaten Sir Reginald if refused. He turned to Rawlings. "Obtain the keys to the family archives. We shall examine correspondence between Sir Reginald and any possible Charles Langford." Rawlings bowed and hurried off. Porritt reclined briefly, letting his little grey cell sift through the patterns. The anonymous letters had been formal, lacking personal idioms, suggesting a writer accustomed to elegant prose. Charles Langford had once been an Oxford scholar and published poet. It fit. But why frame Colonel Danvers? Why attempt to poison Lady Evelina? A conspirator with personal vendettas could orchestrate both crimes to destabilize the family and divert suspicion. Yet the fabric fragment and boot prints hinted at someone familiar with staff routines wearing boots, not Colonel's brogues. Porritt rose and retrieved the day planner. The torn entry on the afternoon of the murder formally read: Take 2, fireplace, But what preceded those words? Could Sir Reginald have scrawled a name or location? The fracture in the page obscured the first half, but a faint indentation remained. 3 characters. Perhaps CL could it be an instruction to deliver something to the hearth on behalf of Charles the 50th. Angford. He smoothed the page and held it at an angle to the light. There, barely visible, were the letters CL in pencil, followed by "Take to fireplace." So Sir Reginald intended to burn correspondence from CL that evening. Perhaps an ultimatum letter. The murderer must have intercepted the note and repurposed "Take to fireplace" as a red herring to implicate Danvers. Rawlings returned with a small bundle of faded letters tied by black silk. Poirot accepted them with a nod. CL correspondence, he observed. He untied the bundle and read through elegant script. Overtures of reunion. Veiled threats of ruin if demands went unmet. One letter begged Sir Reginald to reconcile the past scandal. Another demanded payment for a lost inheritance. But the final letter, dated to days before the murder, bore no signature, only a postmark from London and the same formal prose. You cannot deny what is owed. Poirot's eyes flicked to the anonymous letters in his satchel. The handwriting matched exactly. Anonymous letters, he murmured. Written by Charles Langford Dorr, someone who imitates him. But the letters to Lady Evelina had a gentler tone. These pressed for money. The shift in tone suggested a different author, or at least a deliberate change in voice to disguise identity. He laid the letters side by side. The ribbon binding the family correspondence was red. The ribbon on Sir Reginald's threats was crimson, subtle, to colours, to purposes. Someone had taken care to mirror the style. Suddenly, a knock sounded. Lady Evelina entered, composed but wary. Poirot gestured to a chair. "Madam, I have discovered Sir Reginald's correspondence with CL, a distant cousin. It appears, did you know of these letters?" She clasped her hands. "I never heard of them. Our family shunned Charles after scandal. Reginald said he never wished to see him again." Poirot pored over the last letter. "This was delivered 2 days ago, sir. Reginald planned to burn it here." He gestured to the fireplace behind her. Yet someone ensured it would not be consumed and instead left a clue at the scene. Lady Evelina shuddered. But why would Charles come back now after all these years? Revenge, inheritance, or the hope of reconciliation, then extortion? Poirot replied. He looked past her to the hallway. "I suspect our culprit shares knowledge of Charles's motives, or perhaps is himself CL in disguise." She rose, placing a hand on the mantel. Hercule. "Could Charles be here, in this house?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is possible. The boot prints found near the chimney were of a make uncommon to our staff. Black leather boots with no military tread. Likely imported. You, madam." Handel Paris fashion did any guest wear such boots? Lady Evelina thought. Only lady. Marguerite Beaumont, my late friend's sister. She visited unannounced last week. Poirot's eyes brightened. Marguerite Beaumont Temby, she might facilitate a stranger's arrival. Did she bring or send anyone with her? Evelina shook her head. She left abruptly, before the storm. She was distressed, said personal matters called her away. Poirot nodded. We must locate Lady Beaumont's carriage. Records. But for now, the existence of CL's letters confirms a hidden connection, one that provides motive beyond financial gain. Yet our murderer sought to implicate another. The question remains, who among our suspects has both the opportunity to intercept and the knowledge of Charles Langford's covert dealings? He closed the ledger and letters. Rawlings. He called. Prepare to visit the archives of the carriage house and the stables. I wish to verify boot ownership and inspect visitor logs. As Rawlings departed, Poirot turned to Lady Evelina. Madam, keep these letters secure. and request no further visitors until we have clarity on Charles Langford's role." She inclined her head, concern mingling with relief. Poirot watched her go, then sat by the window, gazing at the distant woods where the carriage tracks lay. The tangled web of family secrets was slowly unraveling. Hidden connections had begun to surface, and with them, fresh angles in the investigation as afternoon shadows lengthened. Poirot whispered to himself, "The murderer's mask slips, revealing not only deception, but betrayal born of blood ties. Soon, the hidden connections will point the way to the next revelation, the secret clue." Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Late that afternoon, Poirot returned to the library in search of solitude. The afternoon light slanted across the rows of leather-bound volumes, casting the room in a warm, golden haze. On the broad desk lay all the gathered evidence: the charred scrap of paper, the fabric fragment from the chimney, the cufflink, the cyanide residue, the torn day planner page, the anonymous letters, and the recently uncovered correspondence. With C.L. he paused by the fireplace. Its hearth swept clean, drew in a steadying breath. "It is here, mon ami," he murmured to his little grey selves, "that the final piece awaits." He seated himself and methodically reviewed each item, one by one, under the lamplight. First, he examined the cufflink, the deeper nick on its rim, not matching Colonel Danvers's pair. He noted its placement atop the hearth ashes to deliberate. Next, he held the fabric fragment, coarse brown cloth, its weave unlike the Colonel's tailored wool, more akin to a stable groom's uniform or servant's winter coat. Its fibrous edge suggested it had snagged while someone climbed into or out of the chimney flue. He laid the fragment aside and turned to the torn page of Sir Reginald's day planner. He tipped it beneath the lamp's glow and discovered, as he had before, the faint pencil indentations: C.L. Take to fireplace. Yet now the letters blurred at the torn margin. He frowned, realizing that only half the instruction was visible. What preceded C.L., his scribbled call, as in call to fireplace, seemed unlikely. Perhaps C, some, or seal. The first three letters of the preceding word remained hidden, but the pattern of pencil strokes suggested an S rather than a C. Poirot's eyes brightened. He removed a fresh sheet of blank paper and placed the torn planner page upon it. With a soft pencil, he shaded gently over the reverse side, coaxing out the indentations. Slowly, a word emerged: Seal C.L. Take to fireplace. The implication was startling. Sir Reginald had planned to destroy a sealed envelope marked C.L., presumably containing the most damning communication from his cousin, and consign it to the flames. But our murderer, Poirot whispered, did not wish that envelope consumed. They intervened. He retrieved the bundle of seal letters and searched for one with a seal. There, at the top of the final missive, was a faint red wax mark bearing the faint impression of a family crest, Langford's emblem. That envelope had already been opened, its seal broken, the letter removed, then presumably hidden by the killer. He stood and approached the bookcase behind him, pulling at random until a leather-bound ledger slipped free. Turning it over, he found, wedged between its pages, a small, blood-stained piece of parchment. On it lay a single word in spidery handwriting: Marguerite. Poirot's breath caught. Lady Marguerite Beaumont, the late friend's sister whom Lady Evelina had mentioned. It was too much of a coincidence. Someone had concealed this parchment behind the ledger, anticipating it would be discovered, yet not by Colonel Danvers, for he knew nothing of Marguerite Beaumont's involvement. It was a clue meant to implicate a fourth party, a woman of society accustomed to misdirection. Poirot replaced the ledger gently and folded the parchment into an evidence pouch. He sank back into his chair, heart racing, the sealed envelope mark, the broken wax. The hidden parchment tool pointed to a single scheme: to hide the true motive for murder beneath layers of red herring. Geez, the key lay in Marguerite Beaumont. He recalled Lady Evelina's words, that Marguerite visited unannounced the week before, distressed by personal matters. Poirot had not yet questioned Lady Beaumont herself, nor traced her movements after her sudden departure. If she had arrived clandestinely, she could have brought the boot prints, black leather boots of Persian make, the coarse brown coat snagged in the chimney, perhaps hers or a hired help's, and the intention to retrieve her cousin's letter before its destruction. But why murder Sir Reginald? The hidden correspondence revealed that Charles Langford threatened exposure of a scandal, perhaps revealing Marguerite's complicity in that scandal. If Marguerite and Charles colluded in some past misdeed, Sir Reginald's destruction of C.L.'s letter would have erased their leverage. When Sir Reginald insisted on burning the envelope, Marguerite may have panicked, resolved to kill to preserve her secrets. Yet Marguerite Beaumont was nowhere to be found in the guest registry since her departure. Poirot's mind raced. She must have returned under a false name, hiding in the estate to intercept Sir Reginald's documents. She alone possessed society manner, the library's intimacy, and the knowledge to craft elegant anonymous letters. The crimson ribbon on the threads mirrored the black silk binding of the C.L. letters, a stylistic flourish she could replicate. He rose once more, pacing toward the window overlooking the carriage drive where Rawlings had reported unusual boot marks near the stables. The tracks ran parallel to the service entrance, suggesting clandestine entry. If Lady Beaumont had returned by carriage under cover of darkness, she could slip in through the stables, change into boots that matched her disguise, and enter the library via the chimney flue. Staging the scrap of paper and fabric to implicate Colonel Danvers, Poirot smiled inwardly. The first false lead had ensnared Danvers. The attempted poisoning had sown further confusion. Now, with no more time to lose, he must confirm his suspicions by locating Marguerite Beaumont and confronting her with her irrefutable proof. He strode to his desk and wrote a short note to Inspector Talbot. Inspector, I have uncovered evidence indicating the true culprit's identity lies in the person of Marguerite Beaumont. Please detain all persons attempting to leave Harwood Manor. I request permission to search the stables, the servants' quarters, and the outbuildings where she may be hiding. Each Poirot sealed the note and handed it to Rawlings, who bowed and departed at once. Poirot returned to the hearth, placing the parchment and the torn page upon the mantel for safekeeping. Light from the stained glass window cast shifting patterns across the floor, as though the house itself acknowledged the turning tide. Moments later, Inspector Talbot and several constables arrived. Poirot guided them briskly to the stables. There, he examined the boot prints, shallow yet distinct, matching the style of a Parisian fashion house. He measured the tread width and called for the stable master. "Which of your boots match these prints?" Poirot asked, gesturing to a mat of fresh straw where a set of children's riding boots stood. The stable master shook his head. "None of ours, sir." Talbot frowned. "Then who brought them?" Poirot pointed toward the tack-room door. "Someone hid here. Check every locker." A constable unlocked each with precision until, finally, a weathered trunk emerged. Inside lay a pair of black leather boots, their soles worn and bearing a shallow Persian tread. Next to them, a folded brown winter coat, its fabric identical to the fragment from the chimney. Talbot held up the coat. "This matches the fragment." Poirot nodded, "and the boots match the prints. Someone changed here to conceal identity. Take this to Lady Evelina's suite. Inform her that I intend to question Marguerite Beaumont immediately. She will be collected if still on the premises or apprehended if attempting to leave." As the constable secured the items, Poirot surveyed the stable yard. crisp evening air flowing round him. He returned to the manor's entrance under the lantern's glow, notes in hand, within moments. Rawlings informed him that Margaret's carriage was found abandoned near the lane's turno servant in a 10. Dance she had clearly hidden nearby, waiting for the right moment to strike again or flee. Porrett's mustaches quivered with satisfaction. The secret clue had emerged from a simple scratch behind a ledger just as Sir Reginald seized Inte. Legends had warned him to trust no one. Now, with his quarry unmasked, the stage was set for confrontation. Tomorrow, he would gather all suspects for the next act. Tensions rise. But tonight, Porrett allowed himself a small smile. In the grand design of this affair at Harwood Manor, every hidden connection and secret correspondence had converged upon Marguerite Beaumont. The final act would reveal not only the murderer's identity, but the twisted motivations that led a house guestee. O'Kill for love and legacy. And Porrett, with his little grey cells alert and triumphant, would orchestrate its unravelling with elegance. Befitting the grandest drama. Chapter 11. Tensions. A chill wind rattled the manor's leaded windows as evening shadows lengthened in every corridor. News of the discovery in the stables and of Marguerite Beaumont's abandoned carriage spread through Harwood Manor like wildfire. In every drawing room and hallway, whispers followed every step. The household felt transformed. What had been a controlled investigation now threatened to spiral into chaos. Porrett convened the key figures in the grand entrance hall. Lady Evelina stood near the hearth, her face pale but determined. Colonel Danvers had been released from the coach house cell pending further inquiry and now wore civilian attire, though his composure was brittle. Mrs. Whittaker and Reverend Brackley entered together, exchanging anxious glances. Inspector Talbot hovered at the doorway. Constables rayed behind him with the recovered boots, coat, and hidden parchment. Porrett motioned to them to take seats in a semicircle. He placed the evidence on a small table before him, illuminated by a single lamp. Msamas, he began, voice calm yet commanding. We gather once more. Recent developments compel us to reassess our positions. The disappearance of Lady Marguerite Beaumont and the discovery of her boots and coat in the stables indicate she has taken desperate measures to conceal herself. Let us consider what this signifies. Lady Evelina's knuckles whitened round the arm of her chair. Monsieur Porrett, Marguerite was my dearest friend. I cannot believe she would harm Reginald. Porrett nodded. Yet the evidence, her personal items, the broken wax seal connects her directly to the hidden CL correspondence, which Sir Reginald intended to destroy. He looked at Colonel Danvers. Colonel, do you recall that envelope marked with the family crest? It bears the thumbprint of our missing lady. Danvers's shoulders slumped. I recall seeing the wax in Porrett's hand. Marguerite visited, unannounced, distressed. I thought she was merely seeking comfort. Comfort indeed, Porrett replied, but also opportunity. The broken seal indicates she read the final letter from CL and discovered its contents threatened her reputation. Mrs. Whittaker rose abruptly, voice trembling. This is preposterous. Marguerite was here for luncheon and conversation. She left before the storm. If she had ill intent, why wait until after Reginald's murder to flee now? Reverend Brackley folded his prayer book. Perhaps she was fearful. Once she realized Sir Reginald intended to destroy that letter, she may have panicked, fearing exposure. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes widened. So you believe she killed him to protect Charles's or her secret? Porrett raised a finger. We must test hypotheses rather than leap to conclusions. Let me remind you of our timeline. Sir Reginald was shot late in the evening. The chimney clue and cufflink framed Colonel Danvers. The cyanide attempt targeted Lady Evelina. But Marguerite's flight and her seized items point to her post-crime concealment. Not necessarily to the murder itself. He paced slowly before them. Consider this: if Marguerite sought to protect her secret, why plant evidence? To exonerate herself while implicating another? Why stage her poisoning? It suggests a mind accustomed to theatrical misdirection. He paused by the boots. Yet these actions also sow discord, divide trust among friends. Who benefits most from such division? Silence fell outside. The wind's moan echoed through the corridors. Lady Evelina broke the hush. Frederick and I were at odds over the estate. Perhaps Marguerite sought leverage to pit us against each other, distracting from her own motives. Danvers's jaw tightened. My conflicts with Sir Reginald were public. No need for a poison or false leads. Marguerite, on the other hand, would guard a private scandal fiercely. Mrs. Whittaker stepped forward, voice quavering with emotion. Or someone else with whispers of scandal to protect someone who knew of Marguerite's past and used it as a scapegoat. Porritt inclined his head. An excellent point. A second layer of deception. Use Marguerite's secret as a smokescreen. If so, the true culprit remains at large, observing reactions, guiding suspicion toward our missing lady. Reverend Brackley pressed his lips in thought. But who among us knew of Marguerite's connection to CL? Lady Evelina only mentioned a distant cousin. Mrs. Whittaker, and I had no reason to know. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes darted to Lady Evelina. Forgive me. But earlier you spoke of Charles Langford's scandal, your family's disgrace. Are you certain none here knew more? Evelina's cheeks colored. My brother confided little, but he retained those letters, preserving them as proof of blackmail. He shared them with no one else. Porritt raised a hand. Let us not assign guilt prematurely. Instead, note how tensions have escalated. Colonel Danvers fears renewed accusations. Lady Evelina laments a friend's betrayal. Mrs. Whittaker senses deeper collusion. Reverend Brackley seeks spiritual clarity. Each of you benefits or suffers from the mounting distrust. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I propose we break these rising tensions through clarity. Tonight, each of you will receive a copy of the discovered letters, both the anonymous threats and the CL correspondence, along with a transcript of Sir Reginald's final planner entry. Study them carefully. Reflect on your own knowledge and involvement, and tomorrow morning we will reconvene here to share new revelations. Lady Evelina nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. Very well. I only hope this brings truth, rather than further division. Porritt smiled gently. Trust in the process. Madam, the little grey cells require time to align each piece correctly. Meanwhile, Inspector Talbot will place no further restrictions on movement provided you circulate with an awareness of honesty. Inspector Talbot stepped forward. I shall ensure no one leaves the manor grounds without my knowledge, and I will review the letter's handwriting against Mrs. Whittaker's brooch-ribboned notes and Colonel Danvers's documents. Danvers inclined his head. Thank you, Inspector. I welcome anything that clears my name. Mrs. Whittaker and Reverend Brackley exchanged glances before bowing acquiescence as each departed to study the materials. Porritt lingered, gathering the letters and planner page. He folded them and placed them in his satchel. The wind rattled. The doors as he closed the session, alone with Inspector Talbot. Porritt murmured, The game has shifted. Tension is our ally now. Forcing confessions or mistakes, observe them closely, mon ami. In their next interactions, even a fleeting glance or slip of the tongue may betray the architect of this tumult. Talbot nodded, respect mingling with urgency. I stand ready, Monsieur Porritt. As the two men exited the hall, the manor's corridors seemed charged with anticipation in every room. From the stables to the chapel, the household braced for the next revelation. Tensions had risen, alliances trembled, and Porritt, with his little grey cells attuned to every nuance, prepared to harness this discord to unmask the one who stood behind the cunning foray of Harwood Manor's most orchestrated crime. Chapter 12. The confrontation that evening. The great hall was rearranged for a sombre assembly. Candles flickered low in silver sconces, their trembling light casting long shadows across the polished oak floor. Porritt stood at the head of the room, his back straight, hands clasped behind him. Little grey cells alight with purpose. Round him sat the assembled household, Lady Evelina, Colonel Danvers, Mrs. Whittaker, Reverend Brackley, and in imagination, if not in person, the absent Marguerite Beaumont, whose presence still lingered like a spectre. Inspector Talbot, stationed discreetly beside Porritt, kept watch on the heavy doors. Outside, the night wind howled, but inside, silence held potent tension. Porritt spoke softly, allowing his words to carry through the hush. Msamus, we meet now at a pivotal moment. Each of you has reviewed the letters and the final planner. Entry. You have had time to reflect on hidden clues and to test your allegiances. Tonight, we shall see who among you can withstand the weight of scrutiny. He turned first to Lady Evelina. Madam, in your perusal of the CL correspondence, did you discover anything beyond what has been shared? Lady Evelina inclined her head. Only sorrow at my family's fractures. Monsieur, the letters spoke of past misdeeds and demands for restitution. I saw no new revelations. Porritt nodded and shifted his gaze to Colonel Danvers. Colonel, your review of the anonymous threats, did anything strike you as familiar? Colonel Danvers folded his hands. The handwriting was not mine. I saw no resemblance to any correspondence I've ever received or written. Porritt leaned forward, yet the threats were penned with the same formal elegance as the CL letters. Someone skilled in society's civilities wrote both. He studied Danvers's face. You, a man of military precision, are unlikely to wield such a flourish. Danvers's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Porritt turned to Reverend Brackley. Reverend, you examined these letters through spiritual eyes. Did any passage mirror scripture or homily you might deliver? The vicar looked pained. Their tone was legalistic, not devotional. I found no parallel to my prayers or sermons. Indeed, said Porritt. He regarded Mrs. Whittaker next. Madam, the binding ribbons crimson for the threads, black silk for the CL letters were both chosen with care. As a woman of fashion, you understand the significance of color and texture. Mrs. Whittaker's lips trembled. Yes, but I could not speak to their origin. I have many ribbons in my wardrobe. Porritt allowed a moment's pause, as though weighing each response. Then he cleared his throat and addressed our present. Now, we come to the core of our inquiry. The true murderer, in staging both a killing and an attempted poisoning, sought to confuse us with misdirection. But I have observed your reactions, your contrivances, your reluctances. One of you believed they could control the narrative and overplayed their hand. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the folded parchment bearing the single word Marguerite. His eyes swept the room. This hidden clue, found behind a ledger, was placed not by Colonel Danvers, nor by Lady Evelina, nor by Reverend Brackley. It was planted by someone who knew Marguerite's involvement and, by extension, knew Sir Reginald's plan to destroy her cousin's letter. He paused, letting the implication hang. Mrs. Whittaker's eyes widened. She pressed both hands to her lap. Porritt continued gently, but this clue was too crude to stand alone. So the murderer framed Colonel Danvers with a cufflink, used cyanide to terrorize Lady Evelina, and relied on Marguerite's secret to divert suspicion. Also, that when the time came for a confrontation, the household would turn on one another, leaving the culprit free to escape. He laid the parchment on the table, Which of you here knows exactly where this parchment came from and how it came to rest behind that ledger? Silence, punctuated only by distant thunder. Then Mrs. Whittaker's voice broke the stillness. Monsieur Poirot, the evening Lady Marguerite visited. I saw her slip this parchment behind that book while Sir Reginald was distracted. She feared you would find the sealed envelope and she wished to remind you of her presence, so that suspicion would fall upon her, not upon another. Poirot regarded her with calm intensity. A confession a near confession. But why, madam? Would you reveal that now? Whittaker's shoulders sagged. Because I could not bear the thought of an innocent man in the coach-house. I realized too late what I had done, I thought, to protect Lady Evelina by blaming Marguerite. But the plan unraveled. She looked at Colonel Danvers. I planted the cufflink after the murder. I stole his cufflink from his room earlier in the day. We had danced together at luncheon and hid it in my reticule. Then I slipped it into the hearth to mislead the investigation. Lady Evelina gasped. Colonel Danvers rose, shock evident on his face. Reverend Brackley closed his eyes. Stunned, Poirot bowed his head slightly. Madam, you admit to framing the colonel, but what of the murder itself? You forced logs aside to plant the cufflink. But who fired the fatal shot? Whittaker's tears began to flow. I did not shoot Sir Reginald. It was Marguerite. She struck when he refused her ultimatum to preserve the old scandal or pay a king's ransom. I only orchestrated the frame-up. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Marguerite Beaumont is absent and cannot defend herself. Your confession, madam, aligns with the boot prints and the coat fragment. Yet the killer who climbed the chimney throat to plant a scrap of paper must be Marguerite. Mrs. Whittaker moaned. She begged me to help. She said Reginald must die for our family's honor. I tried to stop her, but she was desperate. At that, Colonel Danvers strode forward. Marguerite Beaumont is at the east wing. I heard movement there when it was silent for all. I went to investigate and found her hiding. Poirot looked to Inspector Talbot. Fetch her, quickly. Talbot and the constables left at a run. The hush weighed on the survivors. Lady Evelina sank to her knees beside Mrs. Whittaker, weeping. Reverend Brackley stood, hands clasped in prayer. Moments later, the doors burst open. Marguerite Beaumont, dishevelled and white-faced, was led forward, hands bound. She stumbled, eyes wide. As Talbot released her into Poirot's care, Poirot stepped close. Voice low but firm. Madame Beaumont, you have heard Mrs. Whittaker's confession. Do you confirm that you fired the shot which killed Sir Reginald? Marguerite's lips trembled. She nodded, tears streaming. Yes, I could not bear my cousin's cruelty. His threats to expose us to ruin me. When he refused to burn the letter, I lost control. He produced the broken wax seal, crimson ribbon still attached. This sealed envelope contained your secret. You climbed through the chimney flue to steal it so it would not be destroyed. Then, in panic, you shot him, but you did not plan beyond. That moment, Mrs. Whittaker, fearful of your disgrace, plotted the false leads to protect you. Marguerite sobbed. I am sorry. It was love. Misguided. Poirot bowed his head in solemnity. Now, justice must take its course. He turned to Inspector Talbot. Madame Beaumont and Mrs. Whittaker will accompany you to London. The colonel is cleared of wrongdoing. Lady Evelina, you must find comfort in truth, however harsh, lady. Evelina rose and embraced her former friend tremblingly. Colonel Danvers offered a gentle hand to Mrs. Whittaker. Reverend Brackley murmured a prayer for the departed and the penitent. As the constables led the two women away, Poirot lingered in the center of the hall. Gazing at the flickering candles, the house had breathed a sigh of relief and anguish both. The confrontation had laid bare hidden motives, shattered illusions, and brought the true culprit to light. He smoothed his suit and tapped his cane. "Msamis, the night is nearly spent. Tomorrow we shall reconstruct the events in full and ensure that justice, in both law and conscience, takes its rightful place." Lady Evelina approached Poirot quietly. "Thank you, Hercule. You have saved us from further ruin." Poirot offered a gentle, knowing smile. "Madam, it is by knowing the heart and fearing its depths that one uncovers the greatest crimes." With that, he departed into the stillness of the night, the manor's secrets now laid bare, and his little grey cells at rest until the next mystery called upon them. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape Heath following dawn broke cold and silent, as if Harwood Manor itself held its breath after the dramatic confession and rest of Marguerite Beaumont and Mrs. Whittaker. In the entrance hall, Inspector Talbot and his constables prepared to escort the two women to London. Well, Poirot oversaw the final collection of evidence: the broken pistol, the forged letters, the torn planner page, and the shattered wax seal. Madame Harcourt stood nearby, her face drawn but composed. Colonel Danvers lingered by the staircase, offering silent support. Reverend Brackley paced in the adjoining vestibule, murmuring prayers. All seemed under control until Poirot noticed Rawlings's absence. From the circle, he approached Lady Evelina. "Madam, have you seen Rawlings since the evidence was brought downstairs?" She shook her head. "He was here a moment ago, monsieur, but then he rushed back toward the library." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Indeed, Inspector, remain with the prisoners. I will locate our steward." Talbot nodded, and Poirot strode through the long corridor toward the library. The echo of his polished shoes mingled with the distant clank of the stair train. As he neared the double doors, he heard a faint scuffle and the rustle of paper. He flung the doors wide. Rawlings stood amidst overturned furniture, clutching the torn day planner page and the charred paper scrap. His face pale. A chair lay on its side, a lamp shattered on the rug, its once warm glow extinguished. "Rawlings," Poirot exclaimed. "What is the meaning of this?" The steward spun, eyes wild. "Monsieur, I cannot let these go to London. The secrets in that planner. They would destroy everything. You must understand." Poirot crossed the room swiftly, gloved hand extended. "You mean the sealed CL envelope instructions. The scrap trust no one. You intend to destroy evidence, conceal the true chain of events." Rawlings's shoulders sagged. He held the fragile page aloft. Sir Reginald planned to burn his cousin's letter. Now everyone will know Margaret's guilt, but also the scandalous contents. I wanted to protect Lady Evelina's name, to spare you both the shame. Poirot's eyes narrowed. By robbing justice and rewriting history. "Rawlings, you almost undermined everything we have uncovered." As he spoke, Rawlings lurched forward, clutching a shard of broken glass. In desperation, he lunged toward the small desk where the sealed wax and letters lay. His intent was clear: to shred the documents, to erase the chain of evidence that led to Margaret's motive. Poirot reacted instantly. He pressed a button beneath the desk. Hidden panels slid open, releasing two constables who had been concealed in the adjoining alcove. They seized Rawlings's arms, wrestling him to the floor as the steward struggled and cursed. "Stop," Poirot commanded, striding forward to retrieve the recovered planner page. "These materials are the lifeblood of truth. If a single piece vanishes, we cannot reconstruct the chronology." He handed the page to the inspector, who bagged it methodically. Rawlings lay face down, beaten but conscious. One constable cuffed him gently, while the other retrieved the broken glass from the desk. Porritt knelt beside the steward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Rawlings," he said quietly, "your loyalty is commendable, but your zeal nearly led to fresh injustice. Trust the process, not your own judgment. You will accompany us to London and clarify your role in this attempt." The steward's shoulders shook with remorse. "Monsieur, forgive me. I thought I did right." Porritt rose and addressed the constables. "Take him to the coach-house cell. Inform Inspector Talbot. Then fetch Lord Harcourt's solicitor to witness his statement," as the men led Rawlings away. Porritt surveyed the library's disarray, the overturned furniture, the shattered lamp, the scribbled fragments of paper strewn across the carpet. He turned to Lady Evelina and Colonel Danvers, who had followed him. "Madam, Colonel," he said, voice calm. "This attempt to destroy evidence was the final act of fear of scandal, of shame. But in trying to silence the past, Rawlings nearly silenced the truth." Lady Evelina's eyes filled with tears. "Hercule, I never imagined he would go so far to protect me." Porritt placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Love and fear can drive the noblest to dark deeds, yet the little grey cells prevail." He looked upward at the shattered lamp. "Now, we must restore order. Inspector Talbot will oversee the orderly packing of all remaining documents. Nothing else must be lost." Colonel Danvers nodded. "Thank you, monsieur. Your vigilance has spared us further chaos." Porritt inclined his head. "Let us return to the entrance hall. Our party for London awaits Marguerite Beaumont, Mrs. Whittaker, and now Rawlings. Each will face consequences appropriate to their deeds." They walked together through the corridor. At the threshold, Porritt paused and looked back toward the library's open door, now echoing with footsteps carrying Rawlings away. "In every crime," he mused, "there lies both guilt and redemption. Rawlings's transgression sprang from loyalty, but he must answer for his attempt. Yet even he, like the others, acted under duress of secrecy." Lady Evelina placed a hand on his arm. "Hercule, do you think anyone else could have tried to interfere?" Porritt shook his head. "No, madam. This desperate act was unique. No one else knew the private workings of Sir Reginald's planner as intimately as our steward. The rest trusted their own fate to justice." As they reached the entrance hall, the crisp morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, illuminating the assembled group. Inspector Talbot greeted them, nodding gravely. "Everything is ready, Monsieur Porritt." Porritt surveyed the faces, Lady Evelina's solemn gratitude, Colonel Danvers's quiet relief, the inspector's professional satisfaction. He touched his mustache thoughtfully. "Then let us proceed," he said, "to London, for full reckoning and to ensure that every secret, every misdeed, is laid before the proper authorities." And with that, the party moved out, each bearing the weight of their choices, each bound by the unbreakable chains of truth that Porritt's little grey cells had so meticulously unearthed. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place late that afternoon. The manor lay in an uneasy quiet. The storm that had buffeted Harwood's walls receded to distant rumblings, and a weary calm settled over the corridors. Porritt sat alone in the library, the polished desk before him strewn with the collected evidence, each fragment of paper, each shard of confession, every trace of fabric and metal. He poured himself a cup of tea, the steam curling like a gentle question, and looked at the trophies of his investigation. He reflected on the sequence of events, the staged chimney clue that cast suspicion on Colonel Danvers, the cyanide-laced tea meant to terrify Lady Evelina, the hidden CL correspondence, and the broken wax seal that implicated Marguerite Beaumont, Mrs. Whittaker's confession of framing the Colonel, and Rawlings's desperate bid to destroy the planner page. Piece by piece, each layer of deception had been peeled away, until only the raw truth remained. Now, Porritt considered the final missing link the motive that underlay every action. The concealed fear that had bound the conspirators together. He reached for the letters once more, spreading them like a fan across the desk. The original CL correspondence, bound in black silk, hinted at blackmail. The anonymous threats, tied in crimson, demanded justice. The torn planner entry bore its penciled instruction, Seal CL, take to fireplace, each. Document pointed to Sir Reginald guarding a secret that someone wished to exploit. But why, at the heart of it all, had Sir Reginald died by a single gunshot? Who had held the pistol, and why had Marguerite been the one to pull the trigger? Porritt sipped his tea and allowed his mind to wander back to Sir Reginald's final hours. He recalled Colonel Danvers's testimony, the meeting at 4, the tense conversation, Mrs. Whittaker's nervous fetching of gloves, Reverend Brackley's prayerful interlude, Lady Evelina's quiet grief, and Rawlings's unobtrusive service until his recklessness. Yet none had admitted to being in the library at the precise moment of the murder. Then Porritt's gaze fell on the charred bark fragment bearing the dark thread. He picked it up and examined the fabric. Coarse wool, perhaps from a traveling cloak or stable coat. The fragment suggested that someone clad in service garments had ventured close to the hearth before. Year after the shot, he considered the possibility of a Hillborough-hidden accomplice who had aided Marguerite or Mrs. Whittaker in moving evidence. Who else had shared their confidences? He reached for the estate's guest ledger and asylum of servants' rotas. In Marguerite's visiting week, a certain Mr. Horace Finch, a local handyman, had been employed to repair the chimney flue. Finch wore a threadbare coat of similar weave. He had keys to the service entrances and knowledge of the manners. Secret passages. Porritt had spoken little of Finch, assuming the principal conspirators acted alone. But now he recalled Finch's nervous glance when questioned and his absence during the most pivotal moments. Porritt murmured, for the first time smiling with finality. He sketched Finch's name beside Rawlings's and the principal. Suspects. He rifled through reports to recall Finch's whereabouts the night of the murder. He was seen at dusk near the stables, supervising the flue repairs. Then disappeared. No servant had sought him for the remainder of the evening. Could he have assisted Marguerite's entry through the chimney, slipping in to retrieve the sealed envelope and laying the charred scrap? Porritt set aside the ledger and took up the broken flintlock pistol. He fitted the lock back onto the barrel, testing the mechanism. It was the same pistol borrowed by Colonel Danvers months before, but Porritt now imagined it in Marguerite's trembling hands. He pictured Finch guiding her escape, then retreating to help her change, stoking the logs and planting the paper. Mrs. Whittaker, seeing Marguerite's panic, had helped frame Danvers, while Reverend Brackley in his detached kindness had, and wittingly lent spiritual cover. His tea now cold. Porritt rose and walked to the hearth. He knelt to inspect the soot-blackened bricks, tracing the outline where the paper had been nestled. He touched the stones and felt the heat of past flames. All is revealed in the stone. He whispered, yet the final piece lies in human trust and its betrayal. He returned to his desk and penned a note to Inspector Talbot. Inspector, in addition to Marguerite Beaumont and Mrs. Whittaker, a local worker, Horace Finch, played a key role in facilitating the murder and staging the chimney. Clue, he must be apprehended. Please secure the West Wing service entrance and question Finch regarding access to the flue and movements after dark. Each. Porritt sealed the note and handed it to Rawlings. Still pale but chastened by his own confession, Rawlings accepted it with trembling hands and exited to carry out the order. Porritt then ranged the documents chronologically, the initial threats, the blackmail letters, the day planner's penciled note, the murder, the poisoning, the framing, the confession, the attempted destruction, and now the newly identified accomplice's involvement. Each step formed a clear chain of events at last, a seamless narrative of deception, fear, and retribution. As dusk fell once more, Inspector Talbot returned, accompanied by 2 constables flanking a shackled Horace Finch. The handyman's face was drawn, his eyes flickering between hope and despair. Poirot gestured for Finch to step forward. "Horace Finch," Poirot began, "you were employed to repair the chimney flue on the day of Sir Reginald's death. You agreed to guide Marguerite Beaumont through the chimney passage to retrieve a sealed envelope. You provided her with the brown coat and boots, aided her concealment, and assisted in planting the paper scrap. You understand, do you not, that your actions made you complicit in both murder and the staging of false leads?" Finch's shoulders slumped. He avoided Poirot's direct gaze. "I did not fire the shot, but I led her there. Yes, she was desperate. I only meant to help her get her letter back." Poirot nodded gravely. "And you did so. But in helping retrieve the letter, you also helped conceal a crime. You must answer for your involvement." Finch's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, monsieur. I did what she asked." Poirot turned to Inspector Talbot. "Take Finch into custody and prepare a full statement. Ensure he is held until trial." Talbot signed the order and gestured to the constables, who moved forward to escort Finch away. Finch cast one fleeting glance at Poirot, regret etched in every line of his face before he was led out in. To the gathering darkness, Poirot closed the door behind them and returned to the desk. He retrieved the teacup and sipped again, this time savoring its warmth. He surveyed the final tableau of evidence. No strand remained untangled, no figure unaccounted for. The final piece, Finch's collaboration, had slipped quietly into place, connecting the hidden seams of the mystery. He rose and walked to the window overlooking the cliff edge. Beyond, the sea lay calm beneath the moonlight, as though nature herself paid homage to the restored order. Poirot placed a gloved hand on the sill and whispered, "Now, all is ready. The grand reveal shall bring justice and closure. For every soul has spoken, every mask is removed." Turning away, he picked up the folded letters and planner page. He knew that in the morning he would assemble the household one final time for the act for gathering, the meticulous reconstruction of crime and motive. But tonight, with the last clue secured and the culprit's web unraveled, he allowed himself a moment of repose, for in the theatre of detection, the final piece, falling into place, is the sweetest triumph of all, and Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells finally at rest, savoured the quiet victory before the final curtain. Chapter 15. The final gathering late morning light filtered through the tall windows of Harwood Manor's grand drawing-room, casting a serene glow on the assembled company. Round the central card table, reserved chairs had been placed in a circle. Lady Evelina Harcourt, pale but resolute. Colonel Frederick Danvers, posture rigid yet composed. Reverend Miles Brackley, hands folded in his lap. Mrs. Florence Whitaker, shoulders tense. Rawlings, who now bore both guilt and relief upon his face, and even Horace Finch, recently detained, standing in the corner under discreet guard, at the head of the circle. Hercule Poirot sat behind a small writing desk, the final pieces of evidence neatly arrayed before him. Inspector Talbot stood in the doorway with 2 constables, ready to restrain anyone who might attempt flight. It was a scene charged with anticipation, each person aware that, at the end of this gathering, the true culprit would be unmasked. Poirot cleared his throat softly. "Zemus, today we conclude our inquiry into the tragic death of Sir Reginald Harcourt. You have all borne witness to the misdirection, the false leads, and the crimes of desperation that followed. Now, I shall reconstruct the sequence of events, step by step, and you will listen carefully. After this, no secret may remain hidden." He stood and retrieved the black silk-bound letters from C.L. first. Sir Reginald received these correspondence, demanding payment his cousin Charles Langford's threats of disgrace if he did not comply. He resolved to destroy the final letter, sealed with the Langford crest and recorded in his planner, "Seal C.L. Take to fireplace." Yet that very seal was broken before the pages reached the flames. Porritt held up the charred scrap of paper. Here was the murderer's first active intervention, lodging this scrap in the chimney to ensure the words "trust no one" would taunt us. He placed it on the table. This clue was planted deliberately to unsettle us and draw attention to the hearth. He moved to the broken wax seal and parchment next. The wax mark you see here was found folded behind a ledger. It bore the name Marguerite, implicating Lady Beaumont. This suggested she alone possessed both motive to save her family's reputation and the boldness to intercept her cousin's letter. Lady Evelina pressed her fingers to her lips. Colonel Danvers's jaw clenched, Mrs. Whittaker's shoulders quivered, Reverend Brackley's brow furrowed, Finch's eyes downcast, and Rawlings stood trembling. Porritt continued, pacing slowly. Meanwhile, a silver cufflink bearing Colonel Danvers's crest was planted in the hearth as a false lead devised by Mrs. Whittaker to frame him. She confessed to lifting his cufflink and staging it at the crime scene, diverting suspicion away from the true assailant. He nodded to Mrs. Whittaker, who bowed her head in shame. This manufactured evidence was intended to condemn the innocent colonel. Exploiting his known tensions with Sir Reginald, Porritt turned to Reverend Brackley. An attempted poisoning soon followed. When Lady Evelina's afternoon tea was laced with cyanide by our murderer's hand or by an accomplice provoking further fear and confusion among us, he indicated the teaspoon and residue sample. This act was not fatal, but it deepened the sense of peril and disarray. Lady Evelina drew in a shaky breath. "I feared for my life," she whispered. "And yet," Porritt said, "the poison failed to kill merely to terrify, suggesting the culprit's primary aim was diversion." He paused before Finch. "I now reveal the final hidden connection. Horace Finch, our handyman. You were employed to repair the chimney on the day of the murder. By guiding Marguerite Beaumont through the flue, you enabled her to seize the sealed letter and plant the char note. You then concealed your brown coat fragment and boots in the stables to hide your tracks." Finch's head sank. "Yes, monsieur. She begged me for help." Porritt nodded gravely. "Your assistance marked you complicit in the staging of evidence, though not in the killing itself. Nevertheless, you must answer for your role." He stepped back and surveyed the circle. "Thus far, each principal player has been implicated. Mrs. Whittaker for framing, Finch for facilitation, Marguerite Beaumont for the murder, having fired the fatal shot when Sir Reginald refused to destroy the incriminating letter, and indeed Rawlings for attempting to destroy pivotal evidence in misguided protection of the family." Rawlings bowed his head. "I only wished to spare you all the pain of scandal." "And yet," Porritt said softly, "an attempt to erase the past nearly erased justice itself. But all pieces of the puzzle now stand before us, illuminated." He took a deep breath and addressed the group. "Msamas, you have heard my reconstruction. I ask each of you now, does this narrative reflect the truth as you know it? Colonel Danvers, are you satisfied of your innocence?" Danvers straightened. "Yes, monsieur. Though I bear sorrow for the deceit that nearly cost me everything. I stand relieved that justice will be served." Porritt turned to Lady Evelina. "Madam, do you accept this account?" She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, it is painful, but it is the truth." Reverend Brackley clasped his hands. "I accept it. Though my heart grieves for all involved. Double quotes Mrs. Whittaker looked up. "I accept it. Though my conscience will never be free." Finch whispered, "I accept it, sir." Rawlings murmured, "I accept it." Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to reveal a glint of satisfaction. "'Tis been. The stage is set for the final revelation." He placed a hand upon the sealed letters. "In a moment, I shall ask the police to remove those responsible. The law will take its course. But before that, I would say this. Each act of deception here stemmed from love. Fear, or loyalty, yet love twisted into desperation. Fear blossomed into betrayal, and loyalty misguided into complicity." He paused, letting silence fill the room. "Now, Inspector Talbot, you may proceed." The inspector stepped forward, nodding to his constables. One moved to secure Mrs. Whittaker and Finch. Another approached Rawlings. A third signalled for the arrest of Margaret Beaumont and Mrs. Whittaker, whom he had not yet removed from the group for their confessions. As the constables advanced, Poirot stood and tapped his cane lightly. "Mr. Zemus, our story concludes here. Tomorrow, each of you will provide formal statements and face whatever verdict the court delivers. But I trust the truth, when laid bare, heals more than it harms. Carry this knowledge with you, and let Harwood Manor, those cards stand again as a place of honor rather than of secrets." He inclined his head in farewell. "This gathering is ended." One by one, the suspects were led away, their expressions a mixture of relief and remorse. Lady Evelina paused at the door to cast a last grateful glance at Poirot. Colonel Danvers offered a respectful nod. Reverend Brackley murmured a blessing. Finch and Rawlings exchanged regretful looks. Mrs. Whittaker's tears glistened in the wan light. When the room stood empty save for a Poirot, Inspector Talbot, and the flickering candles, Poirot closed the desk and replaced the evidence in his satchel. He turned to Talbot. "Mon ami, we have reached the end of Act 4. Soon, I will deliver my final remarks to Lady Harcourt and the estate's representatives. But for now, let us rest. The grand reveal is complete, and justice, at last, may be served." Outside, the skies cleared, and a single shaft of sunlight lit the hearth, as though nature herself acknowledged the resolution of Harwood Manor's most intricate affair. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Poirot. From his chair as the last constable withdrew, leaving the grand drawing-room hushed once more. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, illuminating every polished surface. He surveyed the empty circle of chairs, each once occupied by a suspect whose fate now hung in the balance. Turning, he beckoned Lady Evelina, Colonel Danvers, and Reverend Brackley to stand by the hearth, while Inspector Talbot lingered respectfully by the door. "Samus," Poirot began, voice calm yet vibrant with conviction. "We have travelled a labyrinth of deception, yet the path to truth now lies clear. Allow me to recount, succinctly and without pity, the motives and means that led to Sir Reginald's death and to each subsequent act of misdirection." He paused, letting his words settle like gentle stones in a pond. The initial crime was committed by Margaret Beaumont. Confronted with the contents of her cousin Charles Langford's final letter, a letter threatening exposure of her past scandal, she beseeched Sir Reginald to burn it. When he refused, deeming honour greater than secrecy, she retrieved the great silver flintlock pistol and shot him once beneath the left breast. In that moment, love for a family twisted into deadly desperation. Lady Evelina's hand flew to her mouth. Colonel Danvers's face went white, and Reverend Brackley bowed, his head in sorrow. Poirot continued, but Marguerite did not act alone in the aftermath. Horace Finch, the handyman entrusted with repairing the library chimney, guided her through the flue to ensure she could both retrieve the broken seal and plant a cryptic scrap of paper reading trust. No one. He then concealed his own brown code fragment and boots in the stables to mask her entry. Setting the stage for our investigation to focus on the hearth, he gestured toward the fireplace. This staged clue was the first false lead, designed to misdirect attention from the real killer. By placing the scrap within the chimney, Marguerite sought to dramatize her act. Even as she concealed her true motive, Poirot's gaze then shifted to Mrs. Whittaker, whose posture trembled with remorse. Florence Whittaker, once a dear friend of Lady Evelina and a frequent visitor to Harwood Manor, discovered Marguerite's desperate plot. Fearful that this scandal would destroy her own standing and believing the household would blame a female relative, she took Colonel Danvers's cufflink, stolen earlier that day during their benign luncheon dance, and placed it among the hearth ashes. By framing the colonel, she aimed to redirect suspicion entirely away from Marguerite and onto him. Mrs. Whittaker bowed her head, tears slipping freely. Poirot nodded in solemn understanding before pressing on. Next came my discovery of cyanide in Lady Evelina's afternoon tea. Here, the culprit Mrs. Whittaker, acting alone, laced the cup with a minute dose. Not to kill, but to terrify and divert further attention. A poisoning attempt directed at the lady of the house intensified our confusion and played upon the household's anxieties, reinforcing the narrative of a multifaceted conspiracy. Lady Evelina's eyes filled, yet she listened with quiet fortitude. Poirot turned to Reverend Brackley. Reverend, your compassionate involvement was unwitting. You provided spiritual counsel to Sir Reginald and to Lady Evelina. Yet you were never a party to the murder or its staging. Your only implication rose from proximity and the vicar's natural instinct to comfort the afflicted. Reverend Brackley inclined his head, relief mingling with regret. Then, Poirot said, came a final act of desperation. Thomas Rawlings, a loyal stood. Upon learning of the C.L. correspondence's content and its threat to the family's reputation, attempted to destroy the torn planner page and charred scrap, believing that erasing evidence would spare Lady Evelina and her honor. His actions, though misguided, sprang from loyalty, not malice. Rawlings, present in the corner under discreet guard, bowed his head. I only sought to protect the family name, he murmured. Poirot's little grey cells twitched in sympathy. Yes, Rawlings, but justice must not be subverted by even the noblest intentions. He surveyed the circle one final time. Thus, the deadly chain, Marguerite's gunshot, Finch's instigation, Whittaker's framing and poisoning, Rawlings's attempted destruction through these intertwined acts. The true motive, preserving a dark family secret, was obscured by a tapestry of false leads. He lifted his gaze, and Colonel Danvers, you, sir, were entirely innocent. Your cufflinks were misappropriated, your presence at the scene misrepresented, and your alibi unjustly doubted. In today's proceedings, your honor must be fully restored. Colonel Danvers stepped forward, bowed deeply to Poirot, then to Lady Evelina. Thank you, he whispered, voice heavy with gratitude. Poirot folded his hands. Now, Inspector Talbot, you may take Marguerite Beaumont, Florence Whittaker, Horace Finch, and Thomas Rawlings into custody. Lady Evelina and Colonel Danvers remain free of all suspicion. Inspector Talbot signalled his constables, and they moved with solemn precision to escort each party member away. As the procession passed near Poirot, the detective addressed Lady Evelina quietly. Madam, though the events have been tragic, the truth's emergence is the greatest safeguard against further sorrow. You may now rebuild your life with clarity of heart. She managed a small smile through tears. Merci, Monsieur Poirot. You have given us justice and peace. Poirot inclined his head once more, then turned to the empty chairs and extinguished the lamp above his desk. In the stillness, he recalled Sir Reginald's final words, trust no one. And yet, through patience and unwavering attention to human nature, Poirot had restored trust in the process of justice itself. He stepped to the window, drawing aside the velvet drape outside. Golden light bathed the manicured lawns. The storm had passed, leaving the world cleansed and bright. Poirot allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The case of the affair at Harwood Manor and the clue left in the chimney flue was complete. With measured grace, he strode from the drawing-room, his little grey cells already poised for the next mystery, confident that whatever secrets lay ahead, truth would prevail. Chapter 17. Outcome. And just a soft light filtered through the library's tall windows as a hush settled over Harwood Manor. News of formal charges had spread beyond the household. Marguerite Beaumont, Mrs. Whittaker, Horace Finch, and Thomas Rawlings now faced legal proceedings in London. Yet within these walls, life moved toward a new normal, shaped by both loss and relief. Lady Evelina stood by the hearth, ranging Sir Reginald's favourite leather-bound volumes upon the shelves. Colonel Danvers paused in the doorway, offering her a gentle nod. Their partnership, once strained by tragedy, had matured into a bond of shared responsibility for the estate. As she smiled to acknowledge him, the ritual of restoration began. The hearth lit, the books realigned, the quiet of understanding replacing suspicion. Poirot entered, his waxed moustaches quivering with satisfaction. "Madam, Colonel," he greeted softly. "I trust events in London proceed as anticipated." Lady Evelina turned, relief evident in her eyes. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. Preliminary hearings confirmed the evidence. The court's thanks extend to you and Inspector Talbot." Colonel Danvers added, "I have written to my solicitor to formalize my exoneration. Your intervention saved both my name and my honor." Poirot inclined his head. "Justice moves at its own pace, but the truth you now possess is droll. Allow me to summarize what each accused will face under the law." He gestured to the mantel. "Marguerite Beaumont, having confessed to the murder of her cousin, will stand trial for a first-degree homicide. Her motive protecting her reputation and family honor may be considered in mitigation, but the act was premeditated when she retrieved the pistol and fired. I trust the court will weigh both her remorse and her desperation." Lady Evelina's hand tightened. "Brown and ivory book. I pay for leniency." Hercule. "She was never malicious, only afraid." Poirot's expression softened. "Understandable. Madam, the law is tempered by mercy." He continued. "Florence Whittaker, who framed Colonel Danvers and attempted poisoning, will face charges of obstruction of justice, perverting the course of justice, and attempted poisoning. Her actions, though secondary to the murder, carried grave intent, yet her confession and cooperation will stand in her favor. Mrs. Whittaker, recently returned under guard to the estate, had voluntarily provided statements to the authorities. Her willingness to admit guilt swiftly may mitigate her sentence." Poirot noted these small mercies in his mind. Horace Finch, complicit in facilitating the concealment of evidence and aiding a fugitive, will be charged as an accessory after the fact. His role guided by misplaced loyalty still endangered the course of justice. He paused, then added, "Thomas Rawlings, for attempting to destroy critical evidence, faces similar charges of perverting the course of justice. His intentions, though loyalty-driven, interfered with due process. Both men may receive reduced sentences in light of their remorse and their cooperation." Colonel Danvers exhaled. "I had not realized the severity of their actions until this moment." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "The law must account for both action and intention. In your case, sir, you are free of all suspicion, a testament to the power of the little grey cells." He turned to Lady Evelina. "Madam, this estate now belongs to you. Do you have plans for Sir Reginald's charities and for the maintenance of Harwood Manor?" She smiled gently, her resolve clear. "I intend to honor my brother's legacy, to continue his work for the parish, to rebuild the gardens he loved." and to establish a foundation in his name for students at Langford College. Poirot's eyes brightened. A most fitting tribute. Sir Reginald would be proud. A soft rap upon the oak door announced Inspector Talbot's return. He entered bearing sealed envelopes from the London courts. Monsieur Poirot, I bring word that bail has been granted for Messrs. Finch and Rawlings. Pending trial dates, Mrs. Whittaker and Miss Beaumont remain in custody due to the seriousness of their charges. Preliminary hearings begin next week. Poirot nodded. Merci, Inspector. Your efficiency ensures the wheels of justice turn without undue delay. Talbot inclined his head. It was an honor, monsieur. He excused himself and departed, leaving behind the faint echo of his bootheels on the polished floor. Left alone once more, Poirot and Lady Evelina exchanged a quiet moment of reflection. Hercule, she said softly, I feared Harwood Manor would never be the same. Poirot smiled, his gaze drifting to the refreshed volumes and the rekindled hearth. Change is inevitable, madam. Yet from this darkness, new light will emerge. The house itself stands as sturdy as ever its foundations tested, but its spirit unbroken. She moved to his side. How shall I remember Sir Reginald? Poirot's eyes twinkled with gentle warmth. As a man of principle, who sought to do right even when that right terrified him, and as the catalyst for restoring truth to this family. Lady Evelina placed a hand on her heart. And how shall I remember you, Hercule? He bowed with a flourish, as your faithful friend. Madam, ever ready to apply my little grey cells, to ensure that, in a world of shadows, justice remains steadfast. A soft chime from the grandfather clock announced the hour. Poirot tipped his head. If you will excuse me, I must prepare my report for the solicitor. Then I shall take my leave. Lady Evelina nodded. Of course, you have given us so much both resolution and hope. Poirot stepped toward the door. Madam, remember this, the greatest justice lies not only in punishment, but in the restoration of trust. You and Colonel Danvers have weathered a storm of deceit. Now, may your stewardship of Harwood Manor reflect fidelity, courage, and compassion. He paused in the doorway, looking back at the hearth and the books, the silent witnesses of crime and confession. Farewell, Harwood Manor. May your walls hold no more secrets, only the warmth of honest hearts. With a final nod, Poirot departed, leaving Lady Evelina and Colonel Danvers to the quiet grand door of the library. The house sighed in relief, its long ordeal at an end. Outside, the sun shone bright upon manicured lawns, promising new beginnings in the wake of justice fulfilled. Chapter 18. The closing remark a week later. Harwood Manor basked in the gentle glow of an early summer afternoon. The storm clouds that once hovered over its corridors had dispersed entirely, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant song of larks. In the sunlit drawing-room, Lady Evelina and Colonel Danvers presided over a gathering of close family, friends, and loyal staff, assembled to commemorate the reopening of the renovated library in Sir Reginald's honour. Rows of newly bound volumes stood ready on gleaming shelves, and the grand hearth bore a fresh iron grate silent witness to past tragedies, now transformed by purpose. At the centre of this assembly, Hercule Poirot stood once more, his posture immaculate and his moustaches perfectly waxed. He wore a quiet smile, eyes reflecting both warmth and the satisfaction of a case brought to its logical end, as Lady Evelina rose to speak. Poirot surveyed the attentive faces before him. Reverend Brackley, having returned to his parish duties. Colonel Danvers, restored in both rank and reputation. Rawlings, now fully forgiven and reinstated as steward, and even Mrs. Whittaker and Horace Finch, released on reduced sentences and quietly rebuilding their lives under the manor's watchful care. Lady Evelina raised her glass of sparkling lemonade. "Dear friends," she began, voice steady, Today, we rededicate this library to Sir Reginald Harcourt, a man whose integrity and passion for knowledge guide us still. We thank you all for your support during these past, difficult weeks, and we are profoundly grateful to Monsieur Poirot, whose brilliance and compassion have restored not only justice, but our faith in one another. Soft applause followed, and Poirot inclined his head in acknowledgment, clearing his throat gently. He took the floor. "Madam, Colonel, Reverend, dear friends," he said, voice courteous yet resonant, "it has been my singular honor to serve Harwood Manor in its hour of greatest need. In every mystery, the heart of the matter lies not merely in uncovering facts, but in understanding human nature, its strength, its frailty, and its enduring hope. Allow me, then, a few closing words." He paused, letting the weight of his mantle fall lightly over the room. "First, to Lady Evelina, your steadfast courage, even amid sorrow, exemplifies the nobility of spirit that your brother admired. You have honored Sir Reginald's memory by channeling grief into renewal, and the estate flourishes under your gentle stewardship." Lady Evelina's eyes glistened. She inclined her head in humble thanks. Poirot turned to Colonel Danvers. "Colonel, your grace under the shadow of false accusation proves that true honor need not a shield too. Protect it. In defending your name, you upheld the very principles Sir Reginald cherished: integrity, loyalty, and courage." The colonel bowed. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," he murmured. "Reverend Brackley," Poirot continued, addressing the vicar, "your compassion provided solace to many in this crisis, reminding us that faith offers strength when reason fails. Your prayers and counsel comforted both innocent and guilty alike, guiding hearts back to charity." The Reverend offered a modest nod. "It was my duty," he replied. Poirot swept his gaze across the gathered staff and to Rawlings, whose devotion nearly led him astray. "Your loyalty, though misdirected, sprang from love and duty. May your caution in the future be tempered by the knowledge that truth, above all, deserves protection." Rawlings bowed deeply. Gratitude mingled with humility. "Mrs. Whittaker," Poirot said next, "your confession of framing Colonel Danvers and your attempted poisoning were acts born of fear and the misguided. An instinct to protect you have shown, remorse and courage in accepting responsibility. May redemption follow contrition, and may your future deeds speak of your better nature." She bowed, tears of relief brimming in her eyes. "I shall strive to deserve that mercy," she whispered. "Mr. Finch," Poirot continued, "your role as an accessory reflected the power of persuasion and the peril of misplaced loyalty. Yet your honest admission and cooperation have restored your standing. Let this lesson guide you toward a path of integrity." Finch inclined his hat. "I am grateful for your understanding." Finally, Poirot addressed the assembled guests. "Every tale has its inciting incident, its twists of misdirection, and its ultimate unmasking. In this affair, the spark was Sir Reginald's desire to end blackmail, leading to a desperate act that cascaded into further crimes. Each subsequent deception deepened the darkness, until the convergence of evidence, physical and psychological, illuminated the truth." He paused, drawing breath. "Let us remember that trust, once broken, may be rebuilt by honesty. That justice, though rigorous, must be tempered with compassion, and that the human heart, fragile and resolute, contains both capacity for wrongdoing and the power of redemption." A hush fell, as guests absorbed his words. Then, softly, a ripple of applause began, first from the staff, then from the invited. "Friends," Lady Evelina raised her glass again. "To truth, to justice, and to the little grey cells," she proclaimed. "To the little grey cells," echoed the room in unison. Poirot chuckled, setting down his glass. "Msamus, this concludes our chapter here. May Harwood Manor remain ever vigilant of its secrets, yet ever hopeful in its future. And should another mystery rise, you know where to find me. With that, he allowed himself a final, contented smile. As he stepped back, the assembly dispersed in animated conversation, some murmuring gratitude, others reflecting on the revelations that had changed their lives so profoundly. Poirot lingered a moment by the hearth, fingertips brushing the stone, as though to feel its history. He recalled the first charred scrap, the interrupted fire, Sir Reginald's final note, "Trust no one." How fitting, he thought, that through diligent care and unwavering attention, trust had been both tested and restored. He turned, adjusting his suit, and strode toward the library door. Beyond awaited Colonel Danvers and Lady Evelina, ready to guide him to the waiting carriage. As he passed the archway, he cast one last look at the rows of books, silent sentinels of knowledge and confession, truth and illusion. Stepping onto the sunlit terrace, Poirot raised his hat to Lady Evelina and Colonel Danvers. "Au revoir, my friends, until next time," they bowed in return. As the carriage drew away, carrying Poirot toward new horizons, Harwood Manor settled into peaceful repose, its greatest mystery solved, its bonds of trust restored, and its legacy secured by the keen mind and compassionate heart of one remarkable detective.